Good evening, members, officers and members of the public, and welcome to this Planning Committee meeting on the 18th of May. As always, I have to give a little bit of housekeeping so we keep safe. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, opposite the lifts. Please do not use the lifts, and also you can use the door to my right, to your left. Assemble on the green in Hawley Square, and an officer, if deemed safe, will come and tell you to come back into the chamber where we can carry on. I don't think there is any planned fire alarms tonight. Filming. Does anybody wish to film this meeting tonight? Could they please show their hands? Thank you very much. Restrictions obviously of mobile phones. I ask you all please to turn your phones to silent, and they must not be used during this meeting for calls or emails and so on. I would ask you to do that, please. Members requesting to speak under Council Procedure 20.1. I have Councillor Austin and Councillor Nixie, who are both asked to speak on item 4A. Are there any other members who aren't on the committee wishing to speak under Council Procedure 20.1? I don't see any hands. Thank you very much. Public speaking. The following applications have been reserved for public speaking. Would members please strike through and make a note of the following items on the agenda. Item 4A, Berth 4 and 5, Port of Ramsgate. Item 4B, 7 Seacroft Road, Broadstairs. Item 4C, 2 to 12, Harold Road in Margate. If you make a note of that, please. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Orban, and I believe, I may be wrong here, but Councillor Curry was stepping in. Is Councillor Curry? He has, okay, Councillor Everett, thank you. Apologies from Councillor Jill Bayford, and welcome to Councillor Roy Dexter. And thank you, Councillor Dexter. Agenda item 2, are there any declarations of interest? Please show. Thank you, members. Councillor Rzeski.
Just a question, Chair, on declarations of interest on the item 4A. Councillor Everett, I believe, was leader when he was doing a lot of things with the port. Would he not be conflicted in this?
I am going to take advice, Councillor Rzeski, thank you. We do have our legal officer here tonight, Councillor Rzeski. Please, Estelle, thank you.
Thanks very much for your question. This is a matter that I've discussed with Councillor Everett prior to this evening. It's not really, if anything, it wouldn't be considered a conflict of interest. It's more an issue of whether Councillor Everett or anybody else in the room who's previously expressed a particular view on the matter would be considered perhaps to be predetermined. But there is a, under the Localism Act, section 25, there is, and I can provide that for you after this meeting if you like, there is legislation that states that no councillor shall be considered to be predetermined simply because of an expression of a previous view on a matter. So when taking a decision, it is accepted that councillors may have previously expressed certain opinions either way, provided that they come to the meeting with an open mind. And there's nothing that I've seen in discussions with Councillor Everett before this meeting that would suggest that. So it's fine.
Thank you, Estelle. I hope that answers your question there, Councillor Rzeski. So moving on again to agenda item 3, the minutes of the Planning Committee held on the 16th of April. I think I've got marked down here. This is the man who writes this out for me. Bit of a smack later. Do members agree that the minutes of the Planning Committee held in April are approved, the correct record? Could I have a proposer, please? Several hands. Councillor Coleman Cook, a seconder, please. Councillor Shrub, do you all agree? Thank you. Sorry about the month being wrong. I think we're all over the show at the moment. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Livingston, our Planning Applications Manager, for a point of information. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. A point of information on two of the items this evening. On schedule item 4A, the officer recommendation on condition 5 is to be added to. So currently the condition states that prior to works commencing on site, a pre-commencement breeding bird survey must be carried out within the port and harbour area. If any breeding birds are present and will be disturbed by the construction work, all works will cease until all young have fledged. The recommendation is altered so that the wording would state, prior to the works commencing on site, a pre-commencement breeding bird survey must be carried out by a qualified ecologist within the port and harbour area. If any breeding birds are present and are judged by the ecologist to be disturbed by the construction work, all works must cease until all observed young have fledged. The ground of that is in order to safeguard protected species in accordance with the advice in the National Planning Policy Framework. An additional point of information on agenda item 4C, which is 2 to 12 Howard Road. Condition 2 has an error in a reference to plan P210 revision B, which should be P113 revision B, which is the floor plans of the terrace of properties, and plus an additional plan, which is P212 revision D, which is the ground floor plan of the flats, should be referenced. So all of these plans are online and will be shown to members this evening, so the condition wording is therefore updated to reflect these plans. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston. Item agenda 4, schedule of planning applications and a public speaking. Members, if there are any site visits decided tonight, they will be on the 10th of June. That is, I think you're aware, a week later than they normally would, but on the 3rd of June, I hope everybody will be celebrating for Her Majesty the Queen. So it is a bank holiday weekend. So it's the 10th of June for any site visits. Agenda item 4A is the application for approval of berth 4 and 5 at the port of Royal Harbour Ramsgate on Harbour Approach. Speaking as an objection to the application is Mr. Murphy. Mr. Murphy, are you there? Good evening, Mr. Murphy. You have 3 minutes, please. Thank you. And if you push the button in front of you on your microphone, we'll all be able to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I speak as a Ramsgate resident and on behalf of the Ramsgate Regeneration Alliance. We object to this application because it is seriously flawed. We believe the applicant has misled you, the Marine Management Organisation and the public. So far as we can see, it is not permitted development. Under the Town and Country Planning Act, Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations of 2017, projects including vessels over 1,350 tonnes cannot benefit from permitted development rights. Vessels supplying Brett weigh more, so the application falls. On permitted development, we understand that the applicant has obtained independent legal advice, but this has not been disclosed to us, and more concerning, my understanding is it hasn't been disclosed to councillors. We believe that members of this committee should see that advice before deciding the application. If it is treated as permitted development, it will create a dangerous precedent because it will pave the way for other applications in the harbour without the transparency, independent checks and scrutiny of your full planning system. However, even if none of these matters are of serious concern to members of the committee, we still believe the application should be rejected because 1, the proposed new position is one of heavy and continual silting and will require regular dredging, but there is no proposed mitigating strategy. Secondly, the design is not like for like. The proposed structure is much longer and larger, with a capacity 7 times more than before. Brett doesn't need it. Brett didn't ask for it. But TDC say Brett will be the sole user. So why do it? Now, this may not be a planning issue, but it's certainly influential. The cost is 280% more than a like-for-like alternative. So, members of the committee, for all of the above reasons, we would invite you to reject the application. However, even if you're minded to accept it, we would submit that if you have any uncertainties about it at all, then it would be appropriate to refer it to the Secretary of State for an independent determination. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murphy. Thank you. Speaking on behalf of Ramsgate Town Council is Town Councillor Green. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. Ramsgate Town Council considers the application before you to replace berth 4 and 5 of such importance to the town that we have taken the unusual step of requesting permission to speak to you. We have some sympathy with you as members of the Planning Committee due to your unusual position of being both applicant and examining authority. As the applicant, TDC appears to have taken your approval for granted in that it has already decommissioned the functioning existing berth in November 2020 and spent a huge budget on a second-hand floating pontoon as a replacement. We ask you to put aside in meeting your decision any consideration of the unfair position your administration has put you in, as you would any other applicant that had foolishly committed upwards of £2 million to a project without planning permission or a business plan. Yes, TDC has a contractual obligation to Brett's, not incidentally a planning consideration. However, this could have been met by repair of the existing berth, a replacement like for like, estimated to have cost around £400,000, or a negotiation to terminate the contract, cost unknown. The old berth supported a 40-ton per hour conveyor and was capable of docking 90-metre vessels. It is planned that the new berth will be fitted with a permanently fixed 3,000-ton per hour conveyor belt and be capable of docking 120-metre vessels. The applicant explains, quote, "This is to facilitate future expansion for the landing of bulk cargoes, the trafficking of mobile plant, whatever that means, and with a lifespan of 30 years. The Town Council considers that the applicant's claim that this is like-for-like replacement is not justified. The new berth would be 3,000% bigger, 300% bigger than the old, and the conveyor capacity 750% greater. At capacity, the environmental impact through increased noise and dust on both the residents and the environment is very concerning. Thanet Council, as the planning authority, is undertaking a revision of the local development plan as well as the review of the future of Ramsgate Port and Harbour. The limited amount of consultation to date does not support any increased environmentally damaging activities in the port. Indeed, many, including the Town Council, think that the future lies in increased recreational activities. Your approval of this application, unless you make severe restrictions on the use and capacity of the facility, restricting use to one user, restricting the type of materials that can be unloaded, the hours of use, the amount of material unloaded, and the road traffic generated, will potentially close many of the options for an exciting future for Ramsgate seafront. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Speaking under Council Procedure 20.1, Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the opportunity to speak about this planning proposal in my ward. Obviously, as has been highlighted, we're making this application to ourselves, so it's particularly important that we're transparent and go into this in full and detailed consideration. We've produced an impressive series of reports from specialist consultants showing technical aspects of the impact of this proposal, but I believe something very important is missing from the information in front of you, a business plan showing how we expect the new facility to be used, which is surely central to its likely impact. Personally, I've found the documentation on how the facility will be used puzzling. It's been highlighted that we're not really looking at a like-for-like replacement. In the marine licence documentation, on the one hand, the HRA report says the expansion does not represent an objective to increase the berth capacity, but the noise and vibration report clearly refers specifically to future intensification, quotes, of Brett's activity and the increased noise as a result. Yet we know from Councillor Bayford's response when he was leader to a question by Councillor Wing that Bretts have not requested a bigger facility. And when Councillor Everett was leader, he assured us that Cabinet had no plans for increased activity at berths 4 and 5. I'm not aware of any change to this policy that has been announced since then. So my question would be, can any of us as members of this council explain with any degree of confidence why we are doing this? A like-for-like replacement would have cost around £600,000. Why, particularly at a time when council budgets are greatly overstretched and our residents are facing increasing hardship, would we be considering spending £2.3 million on an hugely expanded facility, for which, as far as I know, none of us has actually seen a plan, even showing the anticipated income to set against this spend, let alone the environmental and social impacts of whatever proposed use is planned? Surely this is the first thing we should have seen long before this stage. And does this not leave an embarrassing gap in the information needed for a planning decision? As well as this, the fact that we as members have seen no business plan for a major development like this raises serious concerns about our governance. And in this week of all weeks, ensuring proper governance should surely be uppermost in all our minds. Under these circumstances, for members to be seen marking our own homework and giving it an A star, despite its evident missing pages, appears to me to be both risky and wholly inappropriate. Might I suggest that the committee defers its decision pending sight of a full business plan to accompany the technical information, as without this, surely no properly informed judgment can be made. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Also speaking under Council Procedure 20.1, Councillor Nixie.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Chair. Sorry to anybody that is hearing duplicates here. There's an awful lot of things that various people are really quite concerned about, and especially those of us that live in Ramsgate. So my objection relates to the operational phase of the development and is based around the environmental statement. Firstly, failure to consult stakeholders in the environmental impact assessment process. I've asked people that live on the cliff, some of the 100 residential dwellings that are approximately 350 metres from the proposed site. No one I spoke to has been consulted during the process. There are residents with a direct sightline of the port and be directly impacted with no consultation. They are rightly asking councillors why not. Along with that, there's no mention in the environmental survey of Vattenfall, London Array and Siemens, which are based on the port and have a significant number of employees. Secondly, there's a failure to establish a proper baseline on air quality in the environmental study. Thanet District Council is not and has not monitored for particulate anywhere near the site, and nor has Brett, as far as I'm aware. Crushed limestone, which is a source of respirable crystalline silica, is sometimes stored out in the open on site. The environmental survey is inadequate and there's been no baseline monitoring of particulate or nitrogen dioxide near the site. As stated in the environmental survey, the nearest monitoring was was 1.38 kilometres away. It's not as though there's open country between these monitors and the port. There are numerous buildings in between, thus making it simply too far away to be a meaningful reading. According to addresspollution.org, St Augustine's Road is well over the level for pollutants, and according to the World Health Organisation's own suggested safe limits. I do have the specific information for this if you needed it. I won't read it out to you now, but I'm more than happy to give it to anybody that would like it. The environmental survey fails to consider cumulative impact of the wood-burning biomass plant. The port is at one side of Pegwell Bay and is a wood-burning biomass plant the other side. There's little except open water between the port and the biomass plant. The predominant wind direction is from the south, west, and the direction of the biomass plant. It means that, you know, it definitely impacts on us, and I just don't see that environmental report either. the environmental survey is predicated, sorry, it's late, isn't it, on the misleading assumption of a similar level of operation. I think you've heard from everybody that it's not. Generally, I won't repeat on that because other people have done that before me, and thank you very much. And therefore, as people have suggested, you know, a huge increase in capacity means a significant amount of more sand, more aggregate brought in, more HGV traffic, and a significant increase in the number of ships coming to the harbour. Is that in the environmental study? I'm not sure it is. Current operation of the site is unsatisfactory, therefore. Residents have been trying to get something done about this for a very long time, and they are wanting to be listened to. My conclusion to this, therefore, apart from the fact that I object to it strongly and the application is unnecessary, is a site visit and a meeting with residents, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Nixie. I will now call upon Mr. Livingston to give his report. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is for prior approval for the installation of a 119 metre long berth following the removal of berths 4 and 5, and it's under Part 18, Class A of the General Permitted Development Order. So this part of the General Permitted Development Order relates to works authorised by Acts of Parliament, and in particular the relevant legislation here is the Ramsgate Corporation Act 1934, the Harbour Act 1964 and the Ramsgate Harbour Revision Order 1979. So this part of the General Permitted Development Order requires a consideration of the location of development and the design and external appearance of the development. So the principle of development is agreed by the Act of Parliament. So in terms of the site plan in front of members, this is identifying the location of the berth in the port. We've got an aerial image there just showing the port itself. This is obviously taken some time ago. Obviously you've got the cars there from when the port was used for vehicles being unloaded. You've also got the existing berth, the previous berth that's actually present where the mouse pointer is. Hopefully you can see that. Then we've got a photograph taken more recently, which is showing out towards the port itself. If I can draw members' attention to the sort of centre of the image, you can actually see the piles that have been left from the port berth that was previously present. And this is the plan of the proposal itself. So you can see the extent of the previous berth that's been removed. The length of the actual berth itself would be 76 metres, with then the gangway attached to it of 43 metres that you can see there. And then this is the elevation of the berth, showing how it's to be attached to the seabed. So as previously, it's a floating berth. The proposal includes the extraction of the 6 piles that have remained from the previous berth. What will occur is that they will be cut off to lower than the seabed level. You've then got the construction of 4 steel tubular piles, 2 for the gangway and 2 for sort of pontoon restraints. They'll install the floating pontoon with fixtures, and that will include then those 2 fixtures for the gangways, and that will all follow a capital dredge as well. So on the basis of the prior approval process, the consideration of the location of development, the development is in the same location as the previous port berth that was there. So the location is considered to be appropriate in terms of in the port. And in terms of consideration of the design and the external appearance as required under Part 18, it's a floating pontoon with an access gangway. It's got limited projection, obviously above sea level, as you could see from the previous elevation, and therefore it's considered to be entirely appropriate in terms of its appearance in the port. So the development itself does, however, fall under Schedule 1 development of the Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations, which is when a threshold is reached, then it will require an environmental impact assessment to be carried out, which is necessary before any approval can be granted to a project by a local planning authority. So we've had the environmental impact assessment in. That followed a scoping exercise that was carried out last year, and particularly that focused and scoped in some issues that are covered in detail in the environmental impact assessment. So those matters that were scoped in include marine ecology, ornithology, marine water and sediment environment, noise and vibration, air quality, cumulative effects, and then a number of matters covered by the legislation, so habitat regulations assessment, marine conservation zone assessment, as well as including a flood risk assessment. So as part of the consultation on the EIA, particular requirements are in place for an environmental impact assessment and consultation that's needed. We've consulted with the responsible bodies, and the Council received comments from Natural England, the Marine Maritime Organisation, the Environment Agency. We've also received the views of KCC Biodiversity, TDC's Environmental Health Team and KCC's Mineral and Waste, as well as the views that we've received from residents and the Town Council. These are all outlined in the report, so you'll have seen those views and those points. So in terms of the environmental impact assessment, one of the key documents that's been submitted, which has been looked at in a lot of detail by those statutory consultees, is the Construction Environmental Management Plan. So this is because the construction of the piles and the dredge that's needed before that has the potential for the most significant of the impacts on the environment from the construction of this particular berth. So that document, as I mentioned, has been cited by consultees as required mitigation. And in particular, some of the issues that have come up through the individual topics assessing these matters have flagged up particular things that must occur for the development to avoid an impact on the environment. In particular, the actual piling of these tubes has been cited by a number of those consultees as potentially causing a significant effect on the marine environment, in particular with regards to fish and shellfish, marine mammals and bird species. And therefore there are specific requirements in the Construction Environmental Management Plan which relate to the need for a marine mammal observer. There's also a requirement which is under condition 4, which members have before them, which is the need for soft start piling for the piles itself. So that's where there's a gradual increase over time with a low stroke with regards to the hammer, rather than an immediate loud noise from the piling that's occurred, which obviously means that there's less disturbance, or is an increase that allows the marine species such as fish to sort of effectively move away because of the underwater noise that would be created. In regards to birds, though, there's a number more requirements that have been requested by both Natural England as well as KCC Biodiversity. And this is specifically to do with that there isn't a wintering bird survey that's been submitted in the environmental impact assessment. And what that means is construction for piling must only occur between effectively April and August. It cannot occur between September and March when the wintering bird season is. So that is a condition that's placed or would be put on the prior approval. In addition, there is the extra condition, which I mentioned earlier in the point of information, which is talking about the requirement for a qualified ecologist to carry out a breeding bird survey. And this specifically follows on from a concern which is raised in the report that you'll see from KCC Biodiversity about the potential for black redstarts in the port area, because they are species that can be found in industrial and urban areas. And they are protected by Schedule 1 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act, and therefore there is a requirement for a survey to be carried out. So a number of other matters have been raised, both they've been covered in the report, but they've also been raised this evening, as well as the issues that have been raised in the report itself. So just to cover off some of those matters and to provide members a bit more information, there are proposed restrictions on the actual development occurring through restriction in construction hours for both the actual operation on site and also the piling that would need to occur. So in particular, they are proposed to be restricted to, bear with me, sorry, For site working hours, it's 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. till 3 p.m. on Saturday, with no working on Sundays or bank holidays. The piling works, though, so the noisiest works are restricted, though, to 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Saturday, with no working on Sunday or bank holidays. And that is specifically obviously referenced in the environmental health comment, which looks at noise, in particular from the construction of the berth itself. In terms of reference that's been made in the report to the use and addition of a conveyor to the actual port berth itself. A conveyor is not being considered within this prior approval application. It would require separate approval from KCC, and as KCC are the Mineral and Waste Authority, so that would be a matter that they would consider in terms of a conveyor, how it operates, mitigation in terms of dust, etc., for any aggregates that come onto this berth. So that's a matter for the Mineral and Waste Authority. In terms of consultation, which has been mentioned, the council has, as local planning authority, has gone through the various requirements with regards to environmental impact assessments. 2 adverts have been placed in the paper, 3 site notices have been placed, both one at the port, one on Royal Crescent, as well as one in the harbour. 41 parties who wrote in on the previous prior approval application specifically were directly written to about the process, and therefore we have covered not only the statutory responsibilities of a local planning authority for this type of development, but also we've exceeded it with regards to consultation. And indeed, there has obviously been quite a lot of press articles and things like that, so we do consider the consultation is robust. Mention has also been made of the need for this development, the motivation for this development. That is not a consideration for planning committee. It's not a matter that's covered under the requirements for a prior approval application, and indeed, if it were a planning application, it would also not be a consideration of planning committee. So it's just a really important point with regards to the motivation of any applicant, and members will know this from housing applications that have come in. That is not a consideration, the motivation of an applicant to put in an application. In terms of separate processes, there is a separate process that's required to go through for issues to do with dredging. So in this instance, a capital dredge that's carried out. And indeed, the actual construction itself is subject to a licensing process, a marine license, which is being separately dealt with by the Marine Maritime Organisation. Just to pick up a point that's been raised with regards to permitted development and the interaction with the environmental impact assessment regulations, this is specifically covered in the council's report that we've put forward in terms of the application process that members will have seen. There is a specific paragraph in the General Permitted Development Order which identifies that when it is development under Class A, Part 18, the requirement that if an EIA is needed, it automatically needs planning permission does not apply. That's very clearly written in the legislation. There is mention has been made about the extent to which the environmental impact assessment that's been submitted is adequate. It's been considered by all of those statutory consultees that the extent is adequate. This is not a consideration of the operation of Brett, any other operations that go on at the port. That's not a requirement of this environmental impact assessment, and nor is it a consideration for members of the committee. In terms of in addition to the environmental impact assessment, there is an interaction with the habitat regulations. So members will be familiar with the interaction that needs to occur for housing development to avoid an impact of recreational disturbance on the special protection area. So in the same way, we have to assess this development as to whether or not there would actually be a significant effect on the designated sites when it comes to this particular development. This is an image which shows the proximity to the designated sites. In particularly, importance is drawn to members' attention to the left-hand side of the image, which shows the green hashed as the extent of the special protection area, which is the Thanet Coast and Sandwich Bay special protection area. So in this instance, the applicant has submitted a shadow habitat regulations assessment, which is outlined in the report and looked at a number of issues, including the deposition of sediment with samples carried out, and that they've been tested to the required extent to which the dredge would occur, which is under 4.5 metres. Low levels of contamination were found, but the Natural England, though, looked at that shallow HRA and considered it to be insufficient in so much as it looked at the impact of how it, whether or not it embedded mitigation within the work, or whether or not mitigation should be considered separately. The Marine Maritime Organisation carried out a habitat regulations assessment as well, and that is obviously as part of the licence that they've got in at the moment. They identified that there would be a likely significant effect on golden plover, little tern and turnstones, which are the qualifying species, the features that relate to the special protection area, through potential noise from construction. So they carried out an appropriate assessment and looked at the mitigation that could be provided to avoid that impact, and that relates in this instance to the soft start piling. So when that piling happens, the method of piling, as well as the other issues that are raised in the construction environmental management plan, and they've stated that those will be required to ensure that there's no adverse effect on the environment. That has been consulted with Natural England. Natural England have agreed that that is sufficient mitigation, and that the habitat regulations assessment and appropriate assessment have been carried out appropriately, and therefore the recommendation, as you'll see, actually includes the need to adopt that habitat regulations assessment, appropriate assessment, as part of that recommendation, with the mitigations already put through in the conditions. So, in summary, the design and location of the development is considered to be acceptable in accordance with Part 18. With the assessments that have been made, and in particular with regards to the comments of the statutory consultees and how that's led to specific conditions, is considered to ensure that there's sufficient mitigation to avoid a significant effect on the environment and on designated sites. The application is recommended for approval with the adoption of the appropriate assessment at Annex 1. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. I move the officer's recommendation is adopted. Could the Vice Chair please second?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Common Cook. Members, so to you. I'm sure we're going to have a few hands. Councillor Keane.
Thank you. Just a couple of points I want to clarify. What about the point that was raised by the gentleman over there earlier about the size of vessel making it not permitted development? Can you sort of clarify that for me? And secondly, I'm not going to pretend I understand the dredging thing, but is the dredging something that has to be then regularly done? Is that like a maintenance thing, or is it a once-off in construction? They're my questions. Thank you.
So the issue with the threshold of vessel is what's triggered the need for an environmental impact assessment. So that was an issue in terms of the berth being bigger and being able to take bigger vessels means that actually it's exceeded the weight limit in terms of the thresholds in the environmental impact assessment regulations. So as mentioned, that's why we've got in this environmental impact assessment. As I outlined in the general permitted development order, it's clear that in the case of Part 18 applications, it doesn't, when there's an EIA, it doesn't automatically trigger the need for a planning application to be submitted. So the threshold in this instance relates to the need for an environmental impact assessment. In terms of the dredge, so this has been looked at in part by us, but obviously it's mainly a matter for the Marine Maritime Organisation in terms of looking at the licence. So there is a requirement for a capital dredge as part of this because of the extent to which they need to dredge for this. In terms of maintenance, there's already a licence with regards to dredging to some extent, but that is an issue that would be covered specifically by the MMO or the Marine Maritime Organisation in terms of requirements under a licence. So it's the MMO's point on that.
Thank you. And Councillor Everett.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I'm grateful to Councillor Rizeki for drawing attention to my prior involvement in this initiative. I think it's quite interesting that the position of the two main political parties on the council has been in total accordance over this in proceeding with this berth 4 and 5, and the reason for that, of course, is because there is a contractual commitment to provide this berth. and that is the basis on which we're here. And I don't think any of us have got great enthusiasm for spending council money on a new berth to import aggregate, but nevertheless, that's where we are. I wonder if Mr Livingston can just comment on a couple of things that have been raised. One is this issue of referring the matter to another authority. This was put forward by Ramsgate Town Council. It's been mentioned tonight. I mean, those of us who are regulars on the planning committee are well aware that it's not unusual for the council to consider its own planning applications, and that's what goes on up and down the country. Could you enlighten us as to whether there is any process for the council to refer the application to another authority or to the Secretary of State rather than take the decision itself, or does it have no choice over that? And the other thing is, there's obviously a concern about the intensification of use of the berth. And I understand that. And I think that if people, the general public at least, were reassured about the usage of the berth and the amount of throughput that can go on and what other uses to which it might be put, then some of the public concerns about this issue would go away. So I wonder, is it possible for the committee to condition the use of the berth along the lines that have been set out as the intention, on the basis that there could be other impacts if other things were imported or very large additional amounts of aggregate were imported, or is that beyond the scope of what we're doing here?
Thank you. So in terms of my view of the point to do with referring it to the Secretary of State, as you mentioned, Councillor Everett, it's commonplace that when an application is submitted by the council, and indeed this committee has considered an application relatively recently for railings within the harbour area, that those applications are reported to planning committee. It's specifically in the council's constitution that when the council is the applicant, it goes to planning committee. And those two functions do need to be kept very separate of local planning authority as opposed to the council as the applicant. And indeed, that's why one of the points I mentioned about the motivations of the council in deciding to pursue this application is not a matter for the planning committee. Again, it's the point that the motivation is not something that should be taken into account. In terms of referring it to the Secretary of State, there is no procedure that I'm aware of to do that. The Secretary of State, I would offer my professional opinion, would write back and say, this is for you to determine. In terms of taking applications on, we've referred actually, and members will recall the application at Margate Football Club, where there was an issue with regards to a Sport England objection, and in that instance we referred it to the Secretary of State because that's actually what we're required to do, because there's a specific procedure and circular which outlines when you should refer applications to the Secretary of State. In that instance, the Secretary of State declined to comment on it. And that's when they are actually being asked to comment on it and adjudicate on it. But, it's specifically in the Constitution that it can be considered by the Council, and so it should be done so by Planning Committee. In terms of the particular point about restrictions on the operation, the application is under the prior approval procedure. That assumes that the principle of development is acceptable under the Acts of Parliament. Now, in this instance, when looking at the operation or use of that berth, the facilitation of the use of that berth is not something that we're considering. Again, this point about a conveyor that's needed to actually move the aggregates off and the throughput concern about how much that might cause an impact is not a matter for the consideration of this committee. It is the consideration entirely of KCC as the Waste and Mineral Authority. In terms of any increase in operation of the Brett's facility, again, that is a matter that could increase by road. Obviously, members will be aware that the berth isn't there at the moment, but Brett's is still operating. The capacity of that is set entirely separate from this application. In terms of what's being considered here under the prior approval procedure is the design and location. The fact that there is an environmental impact assessment that's been submitted means that we can consider whether or not this development would result in significant effect on the environment. As part of that EIA, it has looked at, okay, what does happen if there's an increased capacity? What happens if there is a potential for more HGVs, for example? And it has been shown in that there is no significant effect on the environment. And that has what we've been consulted with. We've sent to the Environment Agency. They say there's low environmental risk. We've sent it to Natural England. They've commented as well. And indeed, the Habitat Regulations Assessment goes into the detail looking at this development and does consider that it doesn't result in in a significant effect on the designated sites. So it's not something that I think is justified under, not only under this procedure, but I don't think it would be justified in a planning application to restrict it as an operation for the port, which is connected to separate land-based activities, which are covered by separate consent regimes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Everett. Councillor King.
Yes, I might be some time, I'm afraid, because I've actually read the hundreds of pages of the environmental assessment on a day off of work, actually. But I'd just like to clear two things up. We were already exceeding the tonnage limit for vessels prior to the previous berth being removed, and we didn't have a marine licence then. In fact, there were the only marine licences that were present on the MMO site when I had a look nearly 2 years ago were one for a new berth that I believe either Vattenfall or London Array had put in, and our dredging licences. So we were already operating illegally according to the Marine Management Organisation, and the portal is very helpful. I'd like to ask a number of questions for clarification, but I'd like to ask one question first of all. Why did TDC decide to use general permitted development rights with prior approval and not go down a full planning route, given the historical significance of us actually having a cement battery with no planning that Sharon Thompson confirmed in an email has no rights to be there and had no rights to general permitted development? And again, I think it goes back to the governance issue that Councillor Austin brought up. If we're putting our own planning application in, then we should be abiding by the highest level of due process possible. And let's go back three years. We were even trying to get this through without applying for a marine licence, and that was down to the tenacity of a few councillors and residents who knew that that was wrong. I've got 4 pages of concerns, so how do you want me to do this? Read a section and then get my questions answered, or...?
Councillor Wing, if Ian could come back on your first point first, please.
In terms of the motivations of the applicant in pursuing this, the local planning authority isn't the applicant, so I'm afraid that's a question you're going to have to direct the actual function of the council in terms of the port. That's not our decision to adopt this approach in terms of the application. Obviously, we've looked at it and considered that this is something that can be done, but we're not the decision makers of why that application has been submitted. In terms of the query with regards to planning permission, I think in terms of the transparency element, and I think this is a point here, that if planning permission was to be sought, it would need an environmental impact assessment, just as this has, and it would require the same level of scrutiny that this has. One of the things that we're not considering this evening is actually that point about the principle of development. If it was a planning application, you would consider the principle of development, and as you'll know, it's in terms of KCC as Waste and Mineral Authority, they are entirely supportive of this development as it would be a safeguarded wharf. Again, though, it's in there in the report because that's the comment we've got, but we're not considering the principle of development, and indeed not considering the local plan policy, which is SP 12, which would support this development if it was a planning application. So it's about the specific criteria of the prior approval that we're looking at. I understand that there's a concern that we should have done it as the council. When I say we, the council should have submitted a different type of application. But in terms of what members are considering, obviously it is what has been submitted. And again, it comes back to that point I raised earlier. The motivation of the application coming in, the decisions by different administrations, if they are, it is a matter that's passed, that has happened. The application is before the planning committee to consider as it is.
Okay, then I'll carry on. So the covering letter. In the covering letter, the development is described as a similar floating berth facility, when in fact it's different in a number of critical features, many of which have been mentioned before, so I'm not going into them. It states the function will not change and there will be a single operator, the existing leaseholder. However, this is at odds with what is stated previously, documentation including bulk cargo and wood pellets, which are a concern, being possible imports. Additional concerns over design and location. So the original application, the berth was sat on top of the existing berth. So Ian, could we go back to the image
of the berth now it's rotated round. So you can clearly see, and this raises a number of issues that I don't think have been considered in the environmental statement, because I think the environmental statement started when the berth was in the old position, which is sitting on top of the existing berth. This diagram can be very confusing. The entire red area is the new berth, and the squares, I believe, in the middle are the conveyor. Is that right? So the squares that sit on the centre of the red berth are the conveyor, because it is a very confusing diagram. If you're a layperson, I sought advice on this. Also, the numbers around the berth, so all the little figures around the berth are, I think it's mean average tide. So that's an indication of mean low tide. So that's an indication of the levels of silt that exist around that berth. Now you will see as you look below the berth, they go to naught something. There's a large number and a small number. Further down, they actually go to minus numbers. So by rotating this pontoon round, we are going to increase the amount of dredged silt we're going to have to remove to put this berth in now we've moved it. We're also going to have to, there'll be increased dredging costs as a consequence of that berth sitting round. Don't forget this berth is going to take significantly larger ships. The DC Van Leeuwen that visits there is a large ship. Actually, it discharges without a berth, and it's capable of discharging both gravel and sand without a berth. So I'm at odds to know why we need this in the first place. So I don't believe the environmental statement actually gives updated dredging. Going back to the dredging and the marine licences, we are hoping to use the existing marine licence that we have for dredging. And we've got two approved dredging sites. One's in Sandwich, it's closer, and one is Dover based. We're hoping that the Marine Management Organisation will just allow us to dump our silt at these two approved sites, and I believe we've got a certain capacity, and I think we're well under that. But what concerns me is there's been no dredging of this area for the last 2 or 3 years, and I walk this cliff top every morning, and I can tell you most of that lower part is completely silted up. So one of the concerns I have is that we are going to be dumping a significant amount of dredged silt in one because I don't think they're going to take it down to Dover. It's all going to be on the Pegwell Bay in a short space of time, 2 weeks, whereas dredging would have been a continuous process over a number of months. So that's a concern I have there. There's no indication in the environmental statement that the Marine Management Organisation are going to allow us to use that licence to do this significant dredging over a short period of time. Environmental statement is very disappointing that it's scoped out climate change. You know, in 2030, a part of the port, according to KCC's own data, will be underwater. And I know I'm told, but the pontoons float. Okay, the pontoons float, but the port doesn't float. And we have images at high tides of the water encroaching already onto the sand piles and aggregate piles that Brett's have on that site. So, you know, 2030 is not a long way off. So I have real concerns that we are going to spend a significant amount of money on a project that is going to be outdated pretty quickly, or shall we say overwhelmed with water. I don't think alternative considerations have been mentioned. As I said, the DC Van Leeuwen regularly offloads. I think it attaches to the existing piles that are already there from the old pontoon, and it discharges sand, we're told, from an extension arm. Part of that group, there's the DC Ostend, and the DC Ostend, which is part of that DC group, is capable of discharging both sand and gravel without a pontoon. Indeed, I believe the Britannia Beaver, Brett's own vessel, is capable of discharging both sand and gravel. So there is no need for this berth at all. And need does need to be considered, and even if it's not a planning issue, it needs to be heard, because it's the people here that are going to be paying this bill. Also, I believe that the original berth, which was ripped out, I think a few days after it was confirmed an environmental impact assessment would be needed, and that again was forced by a few good councillors and residents. Presently, half of it was taken away. I think half of it was chopped up on our own slipway, and half of it is now existing quite happily in another harbour somewhere else. You know, Councillor Everett quite rightly says we've got a legal requirement to do this according to our lease. This is a spend of 2.3 million. I'd actually like to see that lease agreement before I sign off on any spend of public money. It's been refused me under a Freedom of Information request that was 14 months late. So I go back to governance in this council again. I waited 14 months and 4 of my emails were ignored. That it's just not on. We should be given confidential sight of that lease agreement to be sure that we're spending people's money in the right way. I've mentioned dredging, so I won't go into that again. Ship traffic, as I said before, we were already in breach of the Marine Management Organisation because despite the fact the original documentation said 1 vessel visits the old pontoon, 3 vessels actually visited that pontoon according to TDC's own records on discharge of aggregates. It is nice to hear that the grey seal and common seal will be protected, so I'm thankful for that. And I do think that this environmental statement is a thorough document, and it was long needed. I would like to ask that will all records of sightings of seals be handed to Kent Wildlife and Natural England so that we can keep an idea of the impact on our marine wildlife. Birds, I'm glad that we're doing an extra study of the birds on that site because it said there were no notable species or assemblages of birds in the area, and we know that there are starlings were regularly roosting on the port, a lot of them have disappeared now, and there are also fulmars nesting on the cliff close by, probably less than 50 metres from that. I'm also quite upset that inter-project effects or cumulative impact has not been assessed. The only scoping tool used here was a search of TDC's planning portal, which resulted in the following statement: there are no big developments close by. Because it's a planning application that we are putting to ourselves, I failed to see how we allowed an environmental statement to not recognise the fact that there is a cement business, there is an aggregates business, there are 2 wind farms. I've noticed walking along the cliff top, because now I've taken a keen interest in it, we have haulage people there, we have caravans being stored there. I believe we also have somebody living in a static green caravan that's part of the haulage. One thing we miss completely is the fact that we temporarily have a family of travellers there with a number of legal processes in operation that need to be completed before they're evicted. They have been completely dismissed. The impact on workers or residents living on that site have been completely scoped out of here, and that is a major failing in this. Air quality. So if we've got a map, I passed. The noise and vibration section, I think, was very well done because they located 3 large microphone-looking things on the cliff top. I think one was close to the Paragon, one at St Augustine's, and one further down by the Lookout Cafe. So I think we can pretty much say that noise and vibration was very much well looked at. I'm absolutely shocked, actually. When it comes to air quality and dust, there was no monitoring close to the site at all. We used the existing monitoring stations, the closest of which to monitor nitrogen is on Boundary Road, 1.35 kilometres away from the site, behind the most affected houses. The dust one is Thanet Ramsgate automatic monitor. I'm not quite sure where that one is, but it's 1.38 kilometres away. The nearest properties, as defined in this document, are 330 metres away, which I am thankful of, because the short environmental statement that was submitted when Brett's arrived said, and I've got the document here, the nearest property is 1,000 metres away. 1,000 metres takes in thousands of properties. It's a major weakness. Silica, I've been told, is the new asbestos. Brett's also do no dust monitoring on that site, so PN10 and 2.5, minute dust that can be inhaled and has the potential to be carcinogenic is not monitored at all. Brett's also state that P75 doesn't travel that far. I want to know how they know that if they're not monitoring. And actually, 2 days after I read this document, sand from the Sahara landed on my car. So please don't tell me dust doesn't travel. We're all livid about detritus being pumped into our seas from southern water, but it seems we're not bothered about dust affecting our neighbourhoods. It may be that that dust comes to the beach, but I'm not an expert, none of us are in this room, and we need to make sure that appropriate dust monitoring goes on before we approve anything. Sorry, it took me a long time to read it. I disagree with the use of general permitted development rights for 2 reasons. One, I don't think it's right for us at TDC to be trying to use the lowest level of planning to determine something. You cannot compare railings around a harbour with a potential increase in business, and I don't care, it can be green energy. I just want due process to be followed so that we identify potential risks and they are mitigated against. That is all I want, due process. A resident here has said legal advice was sought. If that legal advice was sought on general permitted development rights, can we have a sight of that legal advice? So I cannot support this development at the moment for a number of reasons. There needs to be a site visit. Appropriate dust monitoring needs to take place so that we can properly identify exactly what dust, if any, is leaving that site and who it might be affecting. We need sight of the legal advice. And we need to make sure that cumulative effect takes into account all the users on that site. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wing. A very detailed report there, but I'm coming back to Ian, if I may.
Thanks. I'll try and come back on some of these points. I've already mentioned with regards to, I understand your perspective, Councillor Wing, about the cost. But obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the cost is not a matter for consideration by the Planning Committee. In terms of scoping out climate change, specifically this has been addressed in the flood risk assessment. So even though it wasn't required, a flood risk assessment was provided, which has been looked at. And again, the information has been consulted with the Environment Agency, who would look at these matters, and it is considered that is satisfactory. In terms of, I'm afraid I'm not going to pick them off in a particular order, if that's all right. In terms of the concern with regards to marine mammals observation, with regards to seals, indeed, the Construction Environmental Management Plan specifically mentions about the requirements of reporting records to Natural England and Kent Wildlife Trust. So that is a requirement of the marine licensing conditions as well. In terms of the dredging and the impact on the dredging from the change that's been made. Obviously, the actual dredge itself needs to be granted a licence by the MMO, and obviously in terms of the assessment of whether or not the EIA is sufficient, as you'll see from the report, the MMO have deferred it to the local planning authority, but they still need to agree it. So if they don't consider that's adequate, and they don't consider that the work that's gone into actually making sure that the dredge and what's taken out of there has higher levels of contaminants, that means that the method of disposal in particular areas would cause impact on the environment there, then it indeed is a matter that would be controlled particularly by them in terms of the licence. In terms of the studies that have been carried out, that has been looked at by both the MMO and also through the EIA in terms of the depth of those samples that have been taken, which have been taken to the negative 4.5, which is obviously the extent of the dredge that's being carried out. So again, you know, there are particular guidance documents that are available with regards to what the MMO have to look at, and I'm sure you're familiar with them, with regards to the marine licence and the sediment analysis that is required. In terms of alternative options in the EIA specifically does look at the do nothing scenario, basically the don't provide a berth scenario. So that is provided in there. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there is a point that the operation of Brett's has continued whilst there has not been a berth for the last few months. So that is something that's been considered in the EIA, and we do think that is sufficient. In terms of cumulative effect of other developments, the EIA is specifically looking at the cumulative effect of this development on future developments. So it's the baseline, it looks at what's there at the moment, and if there's future developments that's got consent, then they need to be counted into the assessment, because obviously, if I give you the housing example, I suppose would be if you've got a major housing development that's been put forward for an application, and yet we've got 900 houses, say, down the road that's also got consent but haven't started yet, it needs to ensure that actually the cumulative effects on the transport network, for example, need to be looked at. So it's looking at the things that haven't been done and aren't operating yet, and what that impact might be in terms of the development here. So in terms of the assessment of what needs to be considered and what doesn't need to be considered, that's specifically looking at major developments. So that's the developments that are likely to have more of a significant effect on the environment, specifically those within, I think it was 1 kilometre or 2 kilometres of the site that are...
Can I come in? Please, members in public, if you wouldn't mind keeping your voices down, please, while the officer's speaking. Thank you.
That's looking at the major planning applications, so more than 10 units of housing or more than 1,000 square metres. And that is a very standard amount of threshold for what would be looked at in a cumulative assessment in an environmental impact assessment. Again, these are the developments that hit these thresholds, and that's what needs to be assessed. In terms of your point with regards to dust monitoring, again, I've mentioned earlier about the requirement of looking at dust that comes from Brett's is not a requirement of this application or this EIA. The operation that's going on at the moment is not what's being considered here. But this is actually something that you'll have seen the environmental health comment specifically that deals with this issue with regards to the baseline used for the assessment, which I appreciate you don't agree with. But it does outline very clearly in the comment of environmental health why it is considered that the air quality information that's been submitted is adequate, and that is the information that's obviously been assessed by effectively the advice that we rely on from the professional experts on this. So we do consider that it's sufficient in terms of the assessment of this particular proposal. I'm sorry, I've missed probably some things, but I don't know whether or not you want to come back.
Just come back at you on a couple. So the noise and vibration monitors were, I would say, within 200 metres of that site. Forget Brett's. We then have to do an assessment of dust in and around that site. And we use a dust monitor, there's 10 of them, but they don't all measure dust. There's only 2 monitors that measure dust. And the nearest is 1,380 metres away. The nearest property is 330 metres away. I get it that the noise and vibration is adequate. We've got the development, we had the noise and vibration meters, and we have properties here. When it comes to dust, we've got the development, we've got housing, and then we've got the dust monitor over here. So forget anything I said about Brett's. That cannot be an adequate assessment. I also want to come back to you on climate. So point 2.316 actually states the area is vulnerable to wider environmental changes due to climate change. So there is a conflict statement within that environmental section. Also, cumulative impact. I did quite a lot on this, and it's about the impact that various things on a site have with each other and their combined impact that they could have on the people that live around. So I sort of disagree with you on that point as well, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Councillor Wing.
I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on those points.
Thank you for your comments there, Councillor Wing. Councillor Crittenden, you did raise your hand a little bit earlier. Do you wish to speak now?
Yeah, it was really just simply to come back on just why is it so much bigger? Can you just repeat that? I know you've covered that before. I was also going to pick up on Councillor Austin's comment about business plan, but I think you've probably already answered that. But thank you.
So again, the need for it to be larger, again, the need and the motivations of the applicant in this instance isn't the consideration of this type of application. I mean, the environmental assessment does outline in the applicant. Sorry, excuse me, the applicant's view of the benefits of it being larger, specifically with regards to the resilience to wave climates and providing more room for larger vessels. In terms of the concerns that people are raising about the increase in capacity, this is something that obviously is a matter that's for both the operation and that point about business plan that you mentioned about whether or not a business plan would be needed. There isn't a requirement for a business plan to be submitted. Again, I think this is where the issue goes back to the decision of the council as the applicant and that decision being made to pursue this, which is not a matter that councillors are voting on this evening. And in terms of, again, this point about a conveyor, which would allow for a greater rate of aggregates to be taken, that's obviously a matter, as I say, for KCC. In terms of the physical restrictions of the Brett site to actually store aggregate, again, it's a matter for the operation of Brett's and a matter for KCC. So I think it's important that members just look at what's being put forward is fundamentally go through a prior approval process which considers what's in front of them in terms of the actual construction of that berth and the how does that affect the environment. It's very clear that if mitigation wasn't in place, it would affect the environment. There's no dispute in that, and in the EIA that it says that, and that's exactly why there needs to be quite a bit of mitigation put in place to avoid the impact of the environment. I will just pick up a point about the specific construction of the berth in terms of dust from that process is something, again, considered in the environmental impact assessment and is considered, again, to be the methods that have been put in place have been considered sufficient by the environmental health team as well. So the impact of the berth itself has been considered by the EIA. And again, we, as the local planning authority, we do rely on our statutory consultees as the people that are giving us the professional advice. And in this instance, obviously, they have come back and considered that the mitigation is sufficient. So I'm sorry I can't answer the question about the business plan. Again, that is entirely an issue for the applicant. It's as the motivation to pursue this. What we've got to consider is what's in front of us, not why we've got to where we've got to. As difficult as I appreciate, I know that members find it, this is a planning committee. This is not the cabinet of the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Are there any other? Councillor Rzeski.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Wing suggested there that maybe a site visit would be helpful. I don't know if other members feel that way, but I think maybe it would. It could be that we need to propose that before we go any further, or do we do that later?
Later, Councillor Rzeski, if you may. I understand where you're coming from there, but I think we just move on this moment. Yes, I've got to go through this first, if I may. I don't see any other speakers. Thank you, Councillor Wing, for your comments, and I know other members find that very interesting as well. But I have got to put this to members now. The recommendation is for approval. With the members of the committee, please show if they agree. Show their hands, please. Sorry? I'm putting it to sorry, yes, sorry, the voice is going tonight. Putting it to members, those for approval, will they show their hands, please? Those against? Abstentions?
Chair, how can there be a decision without a site visit? Surely if we've discussed a site
Madam,
visit.
I'm going to stop you there. It's a decision I make. If there's going to be a site visit, we have to do this meeting in a correct way. I don't say it very often, but it is. Thank you, Ian. Yes, I will. It is the motion that's on the table to members, which you've heard, and that is for approval, and it has been voted upon, and that has been carried. That has been carried, members. Thank you. Thank you. If no more, thank you.
Recorded, please.
I like my vote recorded as well, please.
First of all, may I ask members of the public, please respect. I know you have feelings, as everybody does, and you have the right to. And I am following procedure tonight. I am following procedure in this committee tonight, and I have done for the. Shall we call them? I am going to.
I just hope those that voted in favour of it actually read the
Councillor
environmental
Wing,
statement.
please, I'm going to stop, and we will have a few minutes adjournment, but that has been approved. Thank you.
Farcical.
Sir, I don't know. I can't be rude to. I'm not going to. I'm not being rude to anybody. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask, just for you to clarify, because it's become very confusing to some, if not most of us, about how we get, if we want, the majority of us want a site visit, how we actually get a site visit. Because previously, like the last meeting, when I think it was Leyland Gap, it was mentioned before a vote that a number of us would benefit from a site visit. And we agreed that, oh yeah, we'll have a site visit. We didn't vote on the motion beforehand, as far as I can recall. Now, one or two of us asked for a site visit. Well, one or two of the other members, I agreed with them. I would have liked a site visit, but you moved straight to the vote on the motion, and we seem to do things differently at different committees.
I will come in. I know Mr. Livingston will come back. Councillor Garner, I think you've been on committee for a while now. I have to go through the process as it's laid out, put the motion, what's in front of you to start with. And whether you agree or not agree or abstain, we get a decision there. But if it is felt overall regarding the site visit, I have the right to pull the motion, which is in front of you, if that was for approval, I can pull that, and that is my decision, and then propose a site visit and put it to you. And I think I have to have a proposer and a seconder, and that has to be agreed by yourselves, the committee. That's how it works, and that's how we've always done it. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
I do understand what you're coming from. It can be.
I understand from what you're saying then that whether or not we have a site visit is entirely down to your decision.
No, it's not. It's. I'll let Mr. Livingston come in.
Just to confirm, obviously, with the item that we mentioned, you just mentioned, Councillor Garner, any proposal, the motion when it's on the table after proposing and seconding, the proposer who's proposed it can suggest to withdraw it. They need the seconder to agree and then potentially put another motion forward. In terms of if a site visit was wanted, then obviously the motion that's in front of members would need to be voted down for then a new motion for a site visit to be proposed. And again, as Councillor Tomlinson says, that is how the committee operates, it's how it's operated for a while. So in terms of the majority view of needing a site visit, obviously the vote has been passed, and so the majority view is to not have a site visit, because obviously that's the next step. It's either site visit or it's refusal for whatever reason that's suggested.
Happier?
Well, no, yeah, I do
I'll stop you there.
understand that.
I'll stop you there. We have.
That isn't what happened at the Leyland Gap meeting.
It did. Yes, it did. later if a bit confused. Ladies and gentlemen in the public gallery, I do apologise to you for keeping you waiting, but we are moving on now to agenda item 4B, which is Seacroft Road, Broadstairs. Speaking as an objector, this application is a Mr. Francis. Mr. Francis, if you're there, please, you have 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, on being made aware of the planning application, we sought professional advice. In the letter of objection prepared for us and submitted on the 10th of March, we were advised that the proposed development failed to comply with TDC policies QD02 and QD03. Having further taken professional advice on the report submitted recommending approval, we have been advised that the report in its content is subjective and vague. The report contains inaccuracies, opinions and assumptions which are clearly wrong and misleading, some of which I will outline this evening. Based on the professional advice given to us that the planning application does not comply with TDC planning policies, concerns regarding the submitted report recommending approval, and as advised by Councillor Saunders, we request the Planning Committee to consider making a site visit to understand the principles of our objections prior to any decision being taken. For your information, 4 previous requests were made to the case officer concerning if we could be present at a site visit. None of those requests were answered. The amended drawing does not in any way reduce the impact that this planning application will have upon our privacy, overlooking and outlook. A first floor extension with a full-length balcony would result in unacceptable living conditions for us. From the balcony we would directly overlook when using our kitchen diner, entering and leaving our home, as well as when using our private outside space. Reference is made to the balcony providing sufficient room for a small seating area, which together with obscured glazed balustrade, and this will remove any overlooking by anyone seated on the balcony. There is no reference to people standing or moving about in the balcony. The proposed balcony would face seawards, and it would not be unreasonable to expect that this view to be taken advantage of. Our kitchen diner is the most used room in our home. The case officer accepts the overlooking aspect, but is totally incorrect in reporting that our kitchen window currently provides a low level of privacy. The case officer report states that the current low level of privacy afforded is due to the persons walking past our kitchen window to access the rear parking area. No one else apart from the co-owners walk past our kitchen window. This is an accurate assumption made by the case officer. The other 2 flats at Joseph Court are second homes, and the owners visit occasionally. When they visit, they park their vehicles in Seacroft Road. On the rare occasions that they use the parking area and they walk or drive past our kitchen window, it takes a matter of seconds. There is no impact on our privacy whatsoever. This cannot be compared to that of a balcony or permanent structure directly overlooking us. Access to the side and rear of Joseph Court is a private area, and as such is only used by us 99.9% of the time. The kitchen blind referred to in the report is not lowered to restrict views into our kitchen and is always open and raised when we are at home. Another incorrect assumption made by the case officer. We have a high level of privacy to the side and rear of our house and have done so since we purchased the property in November 2017. This can be seen if a site visit were to be made. Number 1 Joseph Court is our permanent home. If planning permission was to be granted, we would have to live with the constant uncomfortable feeling of being overlooked, a serious invasion of our privacy. We respectfully ask that to consider a site visit. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. You timed that very well. Thank you. And I now ask the planning officer, which again is Mr. Livingston, for his report.
Thank you, Chairman. The application is for the erection of a first floor rear extension with a balcony over with a single story rear extension as well at number 7 Seacroft Road. So this is the application site. It might be a bit faint, but it's outlined in red. So to the right hand side of the photo here, or the east of the site, is South Cliff Parade, which is on the seafront in Broadstairs. You can see here the property in question. At the rear, you have a single story addition and obviously an access as well that goes to a property which is number 9 Seacroft Road, which is at the back. And the properties that's been referenced is Joseph Court, which is next door, so on the right hand side of that image, to number 7. So the main issues for members to consider are the impact on the character and appearance of the area, but predominantly the issue is the impact on the living conditions of neighbouring properties. So this is a view of the front of number 7 at the moment. This is a view down the sides. This is down the side of Joseph's Court with regards to the entrance door and the window at the back, which we'll see a more detailed photo of in a bit, which has been referenced. So proceeding down onto the parking court area there's also been referenced, which is at the rear. So this was a requirement of the original planning consent for the building itself, for parking for all the units in the 3 units that are in Joseph's Court. Then this is the view from the parking court looking to the rear of number 7, and you can see there the single-storey existing accretion at the back, which is proposed for an extension to be built on top of, with a window and balcony. Reference has been made obviously to the window in question with regards to this serving a kitchen. The report very specifically talks about the fact that this kitchen, from looking at the floor plans from the approval, is large enough to constitute a habitable room. So it is primarily the main consideration that members need to look at. So whereas some kitchens, if they're small, they don't have dining facilities, they wouldn't need the required element of privacy or outlook. In this instance, this is a large kitchen, so it does require consideration by members. In terms of the view, turning basically the other way and looking back towards where the extension will be from that window, that's the view that's given of that area. And then this is a view looking down the other side of Joseph's Court, which shows where the entrance to 2 and 3 Joseph's Court. So as already mentioned by Mr. Francis, any resident that's part of the other units would be walking round from the parking area, if they were to use it, round to the front of their properties and round to down to the access to the side. So this is the current site plan of the dwelling itself, number 7. So this is just a plan showing the roof plan with the extension going on top of that single-storey element, with the balcony in the over the top of the single-storey addition. So this is the existing side elevation. So members will recall the photo where you saw the top of this roof. What's being proposed is to build a first floor extension with double doors with window access. Mention's been made to the amended plans that have been received. So the balustrading on the balcony has been increased in height to 1.4 metres, with a requirement of them to be obscure glazed. And this has been pointed out specifically with regards to dealing with prolonged overlooking from people being able to sit on the balcony. 1.4 metres in height means that anyone sitting down wouldn't be able to actually look out and down over the balcony. Indeed, the point that's been raised with regards to overlooking from people standing, that is a consideration for members to look at as to whether or not that would be frequent enough to result in a significant loss of privacy. In terms of the rear elevation of the property, then that's the existing, and then that's the proposed. So the materials that are proposed here is smooth render to the ground floor extension with white cladding on the first floor extension. Members will recall the image, which is that the property is currently white. It's not got the cladding on it, but this development is round the back of the property. It's not going to affect any wider views in the streets, and it's not considered to be obtrusive or result in harm to the character and appearance of the area, in our view. This is the other elevations, there's the back end of the extension facing to the north, and again you can see that it's the extension on top there with the cladding. So just to go through the floor plans, you've got the existing kitchen that's there at the moment, and then there's the existing first floor plan, which shows obviously at the moment there's a bedroom with a rear-facing window, and then the roof of the extension. So what's being proposed is for the kitchen to be slightly extended at ground floor level with a single-storey addition, and then a balcony on top of that, and you can see the width of that balcony, which is 1 metre, with a bedroom which has obviously the double doors out facing towards the east. So as mentioned, the main consideration is the impact on the neighbouring property at Joseph's Court. it has been considered in the report that the the amenity space that's in the corner of the site that you can hopefully see by me moving my mouse around of Joseph's Court, that area is 21 metres away from the balcony and indeed from the window. It's considered that by virtue of the existing wall and then fence, and also the relatively small depth of that area, that the actual balcony wouldn't result in overlooking, or certainly not significant overlooking, to that area to result in the loss of privacy. The parking area at the rear isn't used as private amenity land in that way, so that's not a main consideration. But indeed, the consideration is with regards to particularly the kitchen window at ground floor. Now, in the submission that's been put in separately, the applicant has provided this photo. So I do want members to view this photo, but not to put great weight on it in terms of the judgment, because obviously what you can see from this photo is on the left-hand side, you can see the eaves of the main roof. Now, in terms of the actual view that you would get from an extension, that would be higher up than this image. So it's just really important to state that this is not the view that you would get from that balcony. It's a higher up view that you would get from the extension that's proposed. So in terms of, you can see it there, the window, the kitchen window in particular, the consideration by officers has looked at the existing relationship. In particular, obviously, as already mentioned, the level of privacy afforded to that window at the moment. It is next to the main entrance to the property, and indeed the access that's to the rear for the parking area would only be used potentially by occupants of flats 2 and 3. However, occupancy could well change. It's not a given necessarily that there's not frequent movements using that parking area. It's not something that we could certainly control in terms of that. And so that does mean that there is less privacy than you would normally get from a rear-facing window in a normal property in a rear garden. There's less privacy than you would normally expect in that instance. Obviously, there's also the particular condition that's been required for the seating area itself, which would remove overlooking from a prolonged basis of people sitting out on a balcony that's there. So it is only the consideration of whether or not the balcony being used by occupants would be so severe in terms of length that it would result in significant overlooking to that window, or indeed if the doors themselves for the bedroom would result in overlooking into that window. It is our view that the angle that's present, and you will have seen an element of that angle in the photo that's been shown, would mean that if you're increasing the height of where this photo would be effectively for your view, that it would reduce the angle of which you would be able to see into that window. And again, on the basis that the prolonged overlooking that would be created by the balcony has been mitigated by the obscure glazing, it's considered that the impact on overlooking is not unacceptable, sufficiently unacceptable when considering policy QD02, but it is the primary issue for members to consider whether or not that is their view or not. There are safeguarding conditions that have been put forward. Predominantly that relates to ensuring that the actual balustrading goes up before the balcony is to be used, and the recommendation with those safeguarding conditions is put forward for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Once again, I move the officer's recommendation be adopted. Could the Vice Chair please second?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman Cook. Members, Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Chair. Been unusually quiet tonight. The only comment I've got about this is that why even have the balcony? I can understand if you're standing on there and looking out to the sea, lovely view. Don't get me wrong, that's what everybody wants. But if you're going to sit on that balcony and it's 1.4 metres, and if I'm Old English, so I think that's about that height, if that's about right. Oh, higher. So you won't. Oh, okay. So you won't. If you're sitting in a chair, you won't even be able to see the sea. So what's the point of even having the balcony? So would it be better off for the people just to have, well, I think they call it, is it a Juliet balcony or something like that, where you just have the doors and something that goes across? So I can't quite understand the point of it. And I live in a house where people walk past my street and my house, and I live on a quiet road, and they still wave in my kitchen and say hello through the window. So I'm used to it. And some of the people, I don't even want to know where I live. So we do put up with these sort of things, and it is life. But I just can't see the point of having the balcony if you can't see out of it, unless you're standing up. So that's my only comment on this.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. I was going to come in and say something there about people waving to you, but I won't. I'm going to hand over to Ian.
Without sounding too much like a broken record this evening, the motivations of the applicant are not the consideration of members of the committee. So the fact that they want it is the merits of it, and whether or not it's sufficient as it is.
Thank you. Any other members? Councillor Dexter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have noticed in the notes that Broadstairs Town Council unanimously recorded a vote of no comment. But then we see that Councillor David Saunders, who's a member of that council, has called it in, and Councillor David Saunders is very qualified in planning matters, and he's called it in because of an unacceptable overlooking and loss of privacy. Now, maybe the Broadstairs Town Council has got this one wrong, so I would suggest a site visit, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dexter. Are there any other members wish to speak? No. Thank you, Roy. Okay, well, I put this to the vote, which is for approval. Members, please show their hands if they approve. Those against? Sorry if you didn't hear me. Those against? Abstentions?
Okay, so that's fallen.
So that has fallen. Bear with me a moment.
So as mentioned earlier in terms of the procedure, if a member wants to propose a new motion, obviously Councillor Dexter, you've mentioned a site visit. If members consider that a member wants to put forward that motion and then receives a seconder, then that would be voted on. Obviously members haven't debated the application to outline potential reasons for refusal, so I think that would require debate if it was to move to a refusal straight away. And so therefore it's whether or not a member wants to propose for a site visit and that to be seconded.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Rosecki.
Yeah, I'd like to propose a site visit, Chair.
Right, I have a proposal for a site visit. As Ian said, there has been no real debate. So we've had a proposal. Councillor Shrub, I believe, a second for site visit. Members, do you all agree we have a site visit? Out in Broadstairs.
Take a vote.
For, and against? Anybody against?
Hang on, you were a bit quick there, Chair.
No, I was a bit quick there. Thank you, Councillor Garner. Abstentions? Sorry? Well, it's Broadstairs, isn't it? Oh, yeah. Your abstention. Thank you, Councillor Wing.
I think that was carried.
I think that was.
Yeah. It's fine.
It's not football on that day again, is it? It can't be. It's out of season, isn't it? Oh, very nice too. Thank you. Thank you, members. So a site visit has been agreed. As I mentioned earlier, it will be on Friday the 10th of June at 9:30. So we look forward to coming over to sunny Broadstairs. Thank you. Agenda item 4C is the application for deferral of numbers 2 to 12 Harold Road, Margate. Speaking in favour of this application is Mr. Shepherd, and again I'm apologising for keeping people late, but as you hear, obviously our first item is quite a lengthy debate. Mr. Shepherd, are you there? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, officers and council members. Apologies, I've never been in this situation before speaking, so generally we've been invested in Thanet for 5 years now, and we're heavily invested in the area. We first purchased this site 3 years ago, under the understanding that it was under being put forward for residential development. We have worked closely with the council over that 3-year period to what I believe we have come to a good balanced mix of properties that looks in keeping with the local area. I believe it benefits the surrounding properties in terms that we've dragged the building back towards the front of Harold Road. We've increased the volume of green space, and we have, I believe as well, addressed all the points under current policy conditions with the council over that 3-year period. I also think that it would be a good generation in terms of what the current site's use is. The volume of the existing site will be reduced in terms of its current volume to what we've proposed, and we will be contributing towards the local authorities' housing requirements that I believe at the moment are not being met. So in terms of those items, delivering good quality properties, increasing the outlook from all of the surrounding neighbours, contributing to the council as well through a section 106 contribution, including schools, etc., and things like that. And given that the council's got a good report in terms of us being compliant with all of the policies, I would respectively hope that you follow the council's, the planning officer's recommendations and grant planning permission for the site. Thank you for your time at such a late evening.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd. Speaking as an objector to this application is Miss Leanin. Miss Leanin?
Yes, hi, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm speaking on behalf of the Norfolk Road and Harold Road residents. Our first objection is the developer's admission in the supplementary planning statement that the application is not financially viable to make a Section 106 contribution. A development of this size would greatly impact on the neighbourhood community services, especially the already overstretched Bethesda Medical Centre. There's no provision of social housing either, and I wonder why, as Thanet is one of the most deprived wards in the country. The local plan states that this site, if developed, should have 10 units on it, and pre-application advice cites no evidence was submitted to justify why terraced housing cannot be provided. This has not changed. The plan reads that architectural designs have been inspired by the buildings in the areas deemed to have high architectural designs. However, they're not in keeping with the majority of the adjacent roads, which have mainly Victorian houses. The internal dimensions of the flats are also exceedingly tight, which is essentially poor design. The site itself is significantly lower than Norfolk Road, so the proposal of a 1.8 metre fence at the back of the car park is inadequate. It's unclear how this will provide any security to the opposite back gardens. Barber Court on Harold Road is also concerned about similar security and the structural integrity of their garden walls. Additionally, it's very unclear what is proposed at the juncture between Harold Road and Norfolk Road, as currently there is no access due to an existing large building, but in the plan it will simply be a metre-high hedge with no consideration of security or access sort of between the two roads, and we don't feel this is acceptable. In the initial application, the police firmly rejected the plan due to the car park being a concealed courtyard, which would be a potential crime hotspot. While the latest proposal has added security gates, the car park is still fundamentally concealed and will require significant security lighting. Norfolk Road is a dark sky space with quite an abundance of wildlife. The biodiversity report stated that to minimise impact there should be bat-friendly lighting and no lighting near any trees. Given my above point about the need for security and lighting in a concealed car park, these two issues create a lose-lose situation. Noise and light pollution from the car park will impact wildlife and residents opposite, primarily back bedrooms, and the one tree on Harold Road will be cut down for this development and leave uninspiring hard block street architecture. Regarding fire safety, there's no evidence of any assessment having been carried out in relation to fire access to the proposed 3 houses on the Norfolk Road side. There's little room to turn into the alley without losing precious parking spaces on Norfolk Road, and the fire brigade has noted it's a very narrow alley down to those houses. Regarding eviction and unemployment, in the initial proposal it stated that there was no eviction and no unemployment would occur, but the site had 4 viable businesses and a house with 15-year tenured tenants. Regarding parking, there's only 1 parking space per flat and 5 visitor parking, and yet they're 2 to 3 bedroom flats. This is really inadequate and will impact on the surrounding roads, which already struggle with parking. This area is surrounded by conservation areas, this area of Cliftonville, which is cited in the local plan as being beneficial to Cliftonville. They've also received a significant amount of town deal money was awarded to the area, and yet there doesn't seem to be a holistic view on the planning in total, but this could be a chance to rectify this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Also objecting to this application is Mr. Bryant. Mr. Bryant, please.
I've been living with my family at 20 Norfolk Road for 25 plus years in peace and tranquility. If the side and back of our property becomes an access road for the proposed properties, it will severely impact on our well-being. Therefore, we object for the following reasons. Our semi-detached home will be surrounded on 3 sides by light, noise and pollution 24/7. My wife, grandson who lives with us and myself all suffer with respiratory conditions, diagnosed and treated with prescribed inhalers. My wife's asthma is severe and triggered by allergens, in particular car fumes. We will not be able to open our windows and the pollution will exacerbate these conditions. When these conditions are exacerbated, the knock-on effect is disabling for us, loss of function, loss of being able to work. I'm a military veteran and a war pensioner, having served 22 years in the infantry, so extremely concerned and anxious regarding the extra noise which will come from the new build houses to the back of our property and the side access road. Noise such as car doors closing, revving engines, loud music, people partying, talking, arguing, shouting and having barbecues. If cooking pork is the causes, flashbacks from numerous active service tours, the smell of pork is the same smell as human bodies burning. Relaxing in my garden and my conservatory are my quiet, safe place after work for downtime and my well-being. Therefore, air, noise and light pollution, antisocial behaviour to side, rear of our property from vehicles and pedestrians is a big concern. We are private people and we feel closed in by the proposed development and the long-term consequences of it. The narrow side access is 10 foot 4 inches wide, enough for 2 vehicles, not enough for 2 vehicles to pass. An average size car is 5'10" and a van is 7'6". If the side access is granted, who will police it, who will own it, who will maintain it? Issues such as fly tipping, which already occurred, car dumping, car maintenance taking place, drug use, bin collection, lighting, all need to be considered. The gate proposed in the plan is not at the top of the road, therefore will not stop the access being used unsocially or at night in the dark. This represents a security concern for us. The noise of the gate continually opening and closing, and who will maintain it and guarantee that tenants will use it? Boundaries. Walls to number 20 and 16 have already been removed. This is a health and safety matter. I have photo evidence of the 2'5" retaining wall which has been removed at the rear of our property. Photos showing the retaining walls along the side access road which have been also removed. These walls are not safely secure the land and properties from erosion and collapse. When these retaining walls are rightly reinstated, there will be less room for cars to manoeuvre and park in proposed plan. The proposed new houses will generate more traffic and noise on Norfolk Road and use up street parking space due to difficulty with the side road being too narrow and navigating proposed cars parking bays to be difficult. My wife and I are nurses working for the NHS, so we always need our access parking out the front of our car. I'm worried, concerned about street parking, already extremely concerned of traffic impact with an extra existing large build currently ongoing on Norfolk Road. I do believe this development represents overdevelopment. One family 3-storey property could be built at number 18, within keeping in line with current properties with a garden to the rear and space for off-road parking at the front. It would sell very quickly in today's property market. It would also be more in keeping with the conservation of Cliftonville. The proposed development access via Harold Road could be a cul-de-sac and type development with houses and gardens which back onto the gardens of Norfolk Road property. Again, I believe these properties would be highly sought after.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Also, as an objector for this application, Mrs. Munt, if you're there, please.
Hello, my name is Mrs. Laurie Munt. My husband and I and our children have lived in Cliftonville for 29 years and have been in Harold Road in the flat above St George's Garage for 17 years and brought up our children in this small area. My husband was born and bred in Margate and we've seen many changes, some good, some not. In the 17 years we've been here, we've seen 6 blocks of flats built and it feels as if we're going back to flats everywhere. As it is, there's a massive empty building in Godwin Road and this has been the case for years now. Would it not be prudent to convert those instead of harming the environment and contributing to climate change? There is also an empty plot, the old Butlins Hotel, with a sea view. Could that not be built on? Would these not be more suitable instead of knocking down a lovely old building that has much history and has had successful businesses and that are part of the community? At least one of the businesses now cannot carry on because the new landlord will not fix the roof in the hope of being able to develop, essentially purposely putting the business in a position where they cannot go on to benefit themselves. We also have trouble with antisocial behaviour, and only recently on Good Friday my husband and myself had to sweep glass off the pavement and garage property because 10 drinking teenagers decided instead of putting their bottles in the bin that they would smash them all. My husband did contact the police, and this is just one example of where we'd had to do this. New property also means a huge demand on schools, doctors can't get through on the phone, which is already an issue, dentists can't get one, already again an issue, and other services. And as the water company can't stop releasing raw sewage into the sea, how will more flats and the odd house or two affect their services? Not only the above, but on a personal level. If we are forced to move, we would be homeless, as we don't have any family to rely on, and there is a lack of social housing in the area. And we do not have this option to turn to. The councillors previously said they didn't want any more flats built because they wanted to attract more families. Harold Road is a diverse road and the people are friendly, and I feel that more flats would bring a chaos to an overpopulated area. Why is it that local families can't afford anywhere because the flats are aimed at out-of-towners and they are priced out? And the rental market is unfair to local families as well because the rent is almost the same as London prices. Thank you for your time and listening.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to Emma, who's going to outline the planning application. Emma.
Thank you, Chairman. The application site is outlined in red on this plan. So this is Harold Road on the left-hand side here. On the right-hand side here, you can see this is Norfolk Road, and to the top of the plan is Eastern Esplanade. The site lies just outside of the conservation area. So Clifftop Conservation Area is located to the north of the site, and the Norfolk Road Conservation Area is located to the east of the site. The site also lies within the Cliftonville Renewal Area. So these is just some aerial views of the site. So the site is currently occupied by a garage that provides servicing and MOT use. So these are the existing buildings on the site. So this is the boundary of the application site here. So these buildings running up to the edge of the boundary, and then this forecourt area to the front and to the side here. There's two accesses currently into the site. So there's an access from Harold Road at the bottom of this slide, and there's an existing access from Norfolk Road into the application site. So this is just a closer view of the existing buildings within the site. So these are sort of high single-storey buildings with pitched roofs, and at the front of the site are two-storey buildings. This is just another view of the building. So the application site is this building here with the pitched roof and the buildings behind it, and this building on the right hand side here, and it's the whole of this area here with the forecourt, and again this area here with the forecourt for parking. And then this is taken from Norfolk Road looking towards the site. So this, at the bottom of the slide here, is the existing access that runs to the site. So that's currently used by the existing business into the site. And then again, you can see the buildings within the site. So all of these buildings are proposed to be demolished as part of the application. And then this is again just taken looking towards Norfolk Road. So you can see some of the neighbouring properties that are concerned that back onto the development site in Norfolk Road. Again, the edge of the boundary is this location here. So these are some photos now of the site. So this is taken from Harold Road looking at the application site. So this is the existing garage building. And then further to the north looking towards it. So again, you can see the garage building at the front that's two-storey. It then drops in height along the remainder of the site, and then you can see another two-storey building in this location here, and the forecourt for parking to the front of the site. This again shows the forecourt area in more detail. So there's two trees within the site that you can see in this location here, and it is intended to retain these trees as part of the application. There's a tree off to the left here, which is actually within the neighbouring site. And then a further view taken of the application site again. So you can see there's existing access into the site from Harold Road. And then now we're going south along Harold Road, looking towards the application site. So you can see the style of the properties within the site. So there are some quite traditional looking properties with pitched roofs and bay windows. In terms of heights, you can see that there's a 3.5-storey building to the south of the application site. There's also 2-storey buildings, and then you can see there's also examples of flat developments at 3 to 4 stories in height as well. So this is just off to the south of the application site. And then you can see beyond that, again, more traditional looking properties, but again, 3 to 4 stories in height along the road. And then this is now looking from the south towards the application site on the right-hand side. So opposite the site is an existing garage use, and you can see along Eastern Esplanade is an existing 4-storey flat block. Again, looking on the other side of the road, so this is to the left of the garage opposite the site. So again, you can see the style of properties. There's a variation, there's terrace blocks, there's semi-detached and detached units. There's a difference in roof styles, with some with pitched roofs, some have parapets with setback pitched roofs. There's a real variety in the style of properties along the road. And then this is looking now from the north, from closer to Eastern Esplanade. So this is now close within the conservation area. So this will be the view from the conservation area looking towards the application site, which is in this location here. And then again further down, looking towards the application site, which is on the left-hand side. And here you can see the existing flat block within Eastern Esplanade, which is 4 stories in height. And again, a further view of that flat block. This is now within Norfolk Road, which is the parallel road. So this is the existing access into the application site. And then a further view here. So there's a ground level change from Norfolk Road into the site. So the site does drop down in level. A section plan has been produced, and it does show that there's approximately a 1 metre ground level change from the road level to the actual application site. You can see again the style of properties within Norfolk Road, mainly pitched roofs. There's a variety, again, 3 stories and some 2-storey properties. And then this is a closer view looking down that access road towards the existing buildings which are to be demolished. And you can see here the way the ground slopes into the site. So this is the existing block plan showing the extent of the site that's covered by existing development. So you can see the 2-storey building is coming at the front, and then you can see the fact it's entirely covered in this area here by the existing buildings, with this area here being the forecourt. And then this is the proposed layout plan. So you can see that the proposal is to fully demolish all of those buildings with a flat development in this location here, and then the erection of 3 units in this location here to be accessed from Norfolk Road. So this application has had a lot of negotiation. We've had a previous application which was withdrawn, and then through this current application there's also been further negotiation that's taken place. So just to take you through the plans that we've been considering. So the original application of the previous application was this plan. So this showed an application for 45 units, which included 41 flats and 4 houses. So in this location here was the 41 flats, and this was the 4 houses accessed from Norfolk Road. We had concerns with this application due to the depth of the building, the impact on the conservation area, the limited amenity space, and the height of the building. So you can see here, this was the original elevation plans that we were considering, which showed a 5-storey building with accommodation at roof level. It was very clearly a flat block development. And this is the rear elevation, which had balconies on it. And this is the side view. So this is looking towards the conservation area. So this is the view that we would have had of the development. You can see it's quite a deep building, and then this was a view to the south. So concerns were raised with that, and that application was withdrawn. We then had, I'll just show you also, these were the 4 houses that were accessed from Norfolk Road. So they were originally 3 stories, a full 3 stories in height as well. So this plan was then submitted through this current application. This then dropped the number of units from 45 down to 42 units. This proposal was for 39 flats with 3 houses accessed from Norfolk Road. Again, we still had concerns regarding the lack of amenity space and the depth of the building. This was the elevation that was submitted in terms of the street elevation. So you can see that there was actually a 5th floor on top of the building as well, located to the centre. And there was some concerns with the design of the building and the fact it didn't have enough vertical emphasis. and these were the side views. So this side on the left-hand side is a view that you would have seen from the conservation area. So there's some concern with the lack of staggering within this elevation and the lack of windows and the stark design that you would have got from viewing it from the conservation area. So this is now the application that is now before you. So this has now reduced the number of units down to 37 units. So this is now for 34 flats and for 3 houses. The 34 flats includes 26 2-bed, 8 3-bed, and then there's 3 4-bed houses at the rear. You can see that there's now a deeper communal amenity space that serves the units. In terms of parking, there's 33 parking spaces to the rear and 5 parking spaces to the front, which results in 1 space per flat plus an additional 4 parking spaces. And then for the 3 houses, there's 2 parking spaces per unit. Now, the site is a very deep site. It can accommodate a large development. You would have seen from, actually, if I just, flick back through to the aerial view. Sorry, a bit far back, actually, sorry. Sorry, too far back. If you look at this view, you can see in terms of the sites in Harold Road, all of the sites in Harold Road are extremely deep. There's lots of examples where we've previously approved developments at the rear, where there's been conversions of buildings and where there's been new build houses built at the rear because of the fact the site is so deep. So in terms of pattern of development, the site can accommodate a larger building and it can accommodate development at the rear, and that would be considered to be in keeping with the pattern of development that you can see within Harold Road. Sorry, that's bad planning. Then this is a closer view of the block plan. So you can see in closer detail the layout. You can see that there's a bin storage area within this location here, which would be accessed from Harold Road. There's a cycle store area in this location here. For the house at the back, this is the access with a bin collection point in this location here and some setback gates into the site. You can see to the top here, these are the trees that are being retained as part of the application, so they're located within the amenity space. The building's set back in line with the existing front elevation of the property to the south, so number 14 to 16 Harold Road. So it follows the existing building line, and you can see it's quite a staggered front elevation. And this again just shows the parking spaces. So there's electric vehicle charging within the rear area. And again, you can see the refuse store areas and a setback gate within this central area. So this is an undercroft that goes under the building, access from Harold Road with some setback gates. So this is now the proposed front elevation. So in terms of its design, it's not overly traditional, but it does respect some of the characteristics of buildings within the road. It's red and yellow bricked building. You can see that the front elevation where it's staggered, it now provides quite a vertical emphasis along the building, so it gives the appearance of separate blocks rather than one large block. So that's characteristic of the road where there are mainly individual properties within the road. In terms of the fenestration, you can see the quite large modern windows with floor to ceiling glazing, which does help to add interest to the front elevation. In these locations here, there are projections, like bay projections, which again respect the fact that there's a number of bay projections on properties within the street. So zinc claddings being used on those elements, which again help to add interest to the front elevation. And at the top floor here, this is not a pitch roof, this is still part of, like, flush with the front of the building. But by using the cladding at this top level, it gives the appearance of a dropped eaves level between the blocks. And then this is a proposed rear elevation, so it's similar in appearance. There's a few balcony areas to the centre here, but mostly it's just balconettes, and again, the floor to ceiling glazing is provided. And then these are the side elevations. So this side elevation on the right, the south facing elevation, that faces a neighbouring property. There's only a small gap in between, so this view wouldn't really be that visible within the street. The north facing elevation is the view from the conservation area. This is now a very staggered elevation. So the closest point of this is the yellow brick element. The part on the right of that and on the left of that, they're then in line with one another, and this rear section is set much further back. So in terms of the view that you would get standing in the street, it would mainly be of this front section and then this section here and potentially this section, but you wouldn't really get much of a view from this one given the setback. So that has really helped to reduce the depth of the building as viewed from the conservation area. This is the proposed ground floor plan. So in terms of the size of the units, the green coloured flats are the 3-bed units. They're all located at the rear of the building. Each of the units meets the minimum space standards for the size unit. This is the first floor plan showing the units, and the second. So you can see there's 3 units here at the back that have the balconies, but none of the buildings closest to the neighbours on to the south have any balconies. And then this is the third floor plan. And then going back to the site plan, just to show you now the elevations of the houses, which are located to the south here. So this is the front elevation of the terraced houses. So concerns being raised from residents regarding potential overlooking from these units. So we have sought amended plans that have removed the dormer windows that were located within the roof and replaced those with Velux windows. So this is, whilst it's in the description as a 3-storey building, it's only 2-storey to eaves level, and now at roof level, it's Velux is within the roof in order to reduce any perception of overlooking. And there's also the ground level reduction that, of the 1 metre to these buildings. So I'll show you later the section plan. You can see the impact on the neighbours. But in terms of the actual design, these are pitched roof, the red and yellow brick again to tie in with the material, pallet materials from the original building. The windows are slightly smaller, the UPVC grey windows. And then this is the rear elevation. This has maintained the dormer at the rear. And then this is the ground floor plan of the unit. And you can see there's 2 bedrooms at first floor and 2 bedrooms at second floor. This is a street elevation, so showing the existing site, which is on the top of the slide. So you can see the existing garage in this location here and the units behind it. And then you can see the proposed development. So whilst there, again, has been concern from residents regarding the scale of the building and the depth of the building, it does actually tie in quite nicely within the street scene. In terms of the height, it's not particularly out of character with the scale and height of other buildings within the area. As you saw from the photos, there's a number of terrace buildings within the street. So again, in terms of the width of the building, where it's broken up to give the appearance almost of terrace units within the block, this would mean it would appear quite in keeping with the character of the area. And then this is just to show now the impact on the neighbours. So the main neighbours affected is Barber Court, which is in this location here, so number 14 to 16. So there's a 2.6 metre gap between the proposed development and the side elevation of that neighbouring property. Then at this point here, the building sets away from the boundary, creating a distance of 4.4 metres to the neighbouring property. And then this section of the building does extend beyond the rear elevation of number 14 to 16 by 5.4 metres. But you can see, given that distance, in terms of looking at a 45-degree line from the nearest neighbouring window from that property, the development would not actually breach that 45-degree line, and therefore the impact on light and outlook to these neighbouring properties is considered to be acceptable. There's no side-facing windows within this elevation, so there's no direct overlooking of those properties. Darwin Court, which is the big flat block that's on Eastern Esplanade, is in this location here. There's a distance of 20 metres from the nearest window within the side elevation of the proposed development and the nearest window within Darwin Court. So there's no windows within this elevation. Their windows are set back, so there's a good 20-metre distance. The windows that are in this side elevation are overlooking a parking court area. So actually it could almost be argued a benefit to have some additional natural surveillance of that space, but there's not considered to be any real overlooking concerns of the neighbouring property. There's a communal amenity space in this location here that serves Darwin Court, so there would be some views from these windows in this location here towards that communal space. There's a distance of 9 metres to that communal space. However, the communal space is not a private area, and it's also screened by the trees which are to be retained, and it's not considered that there would be any significant concern regarding overlooking to those properties. In terms of the properties on Norfolk Road, there's a distance of 24 metres from the front elevation of the 3 terrace units to the rear elevation of the properties in Norfolk Road. So that's quite a considerable distance anyway. Then on top of that, as mentioned, we've sought to amend the front elevation to remove the doormat and replace that with a Velux window, so that's reduced the perception of overlooking. And then this is now the section plan that's been produced that shows the relationship between the terrace units and the property in Norfolk Road. So Norfolk Road is on the left-hand side. You can see that the ground level of the access is reducing, and therefore in terms of the ease level of the proposed development, it is lower than the ease level of the buildings in Norfolk Road, and therefore given the distance and the drop in ground level and the amendment as the remove the dormer, it's considered that the impact on the privacy of these properties is acceptable. Concern has been raised, I think, regarding the boundary fences and the potential concerns regarding that, because there's a retaining wall that was in this location here. I believe that's probably the wall that was mentioned, that there's been some removal of the retaining wall. So where there are some ground level changes across the site, and there is some concern about what height fences would be erected around the parking areas, we have put a condition on the consent that would look for details of the levels of the site to come in, so that we can understand what boundary treatment height is necessary in order to avoid any overlooking or any concerns regarding noise and disturbance from the parking area to the neighbours, and to make sure there's a structurally sound boundary serving the neighbouring properties. In terms of access, highways have raised no concerns with the access. So this access is, the existing access is in this location here, so it's moved slightly, so it's a new drop curb in this location. There's adequate pedestrian visibility displays. You can see from the 5 parking spaces to the front, these also have adequate pedestrian visibility, and therefore there's no concerns regarding the actual safety of the access or the parking spaces. In terms of the access to the rear, it's an existing access, so there's no concerns regarding the use of that existing access. Concerns being raised from residents regarding vehicle movements and the potential increase from vehicles using the site. So a transport statement was submitted with the application that looked at trip generation. The existing use of the site is as an MOT garage, and therefore there's a lot of vehicles that would currently use the site. The existing vehicle trips that were assessed were 223 vehicle trips across a 12-hour period. When looking at the proposed use, and this was actually based on the original number before it was amended, it looked at 97 vehicle trips across 12 hours. So there's actually potentially going to be a reduction of 126 vehicle trips as a result of this proposed residential development when compared to the existing garage use. So given that, the impact on highway safety is considered to be acceptable. So the issues are with this site. The site is an allocated housing site within the Thanet local plan. It's allocated for a notional 10 units, although what we need to look at is potentially the optimum use of the land, and when there's no other material considerations that would say otherwise, we could look at increasing that number of units. So it's not set within the policy, it's just a potential number. The site also falls, though, within the Cliftonville development plan, where we would encourage larger family units, and we would object to any one-bed units. So there's no one-bed units within the development. There is a mix of units, so there are the 2-bed flats, 3-bed flats, and the 4-bed houses across the site. We did initially encourage the developer to come forward with a housing scheme, and I'll go over that later, but that was to do, the concerns with that were to do with viability, but I will come on to that later. In terms of the actual number of units, we have a lack of 5-year supply of housing, and therefore any increase in number of units would be encouraged unless there's any environmental harm that would say otherwise. So in terms of looking at the viability, the application came forward initially with a proposal for no affordable housing on site and no off-site contributions. We asked for the viability assessment to come in, which has been independently reviewed. When looking at that assessment, some concerns were raised with the figures that were provided, and some negotiation has taken place. And as a result of that, we are now looking at an offer of £125,000 of contributions from the developer for the application. So in looking at the financial contributions that have been requested by consultees, we're looking at allocating that to healthcare. So the CCG request for £30,564, the contribution would go towards that, which is looking at expansion of the local medical practice. There would be a contribution of £15,542, which would go to the special education provision. and then a contribution of £2,015, which will go towards waste improvements of the waste recycling centre. This leaves a remaining amount of £76,877, which would go towards an affordable housing off-site contribution, which would be used towards affordable housing provision in the local area. So it's considered that on balance with the viability assessment that's been carried out, that this is an acceptable approach to put forward to members. Through that viability assessment, an option for 10 houses was considered. So we did actually have an independent review by our consultants of a 10-unit scheme, and the consultants did agree that to try and put 10 houses on the site was an unviable option, and therefore it would not come forward as part of a planning application. So obviously members are considering tonight this application, which is for the mixed flat development with houses scheme. So the site is previously developed land, so it is the site that we would be looking to support housing on and encourage to come forward for housing development. It will achieve a number of units that will contribute towards our housing supply. In terms of the design, we consider that the design as now amended is acceptable and has limited impact on the conservation area and the setting of the conservation area, and will appear in keeping with the street scene and the character and appearance of Harold Road. In terms of the impact on neighbours, we feel that this has now been adequately addressed, and that through the amendments, the impact on neighbouring amenity is acceptable. And there's no concerns regarding highways or any other concerns from other consultees. So it is recommended that the application is deferred and delegated for approval, subject to the receipt of the legal agreement securing the financial contributions, which would include the SPA contribution as well, and safeguarding conditions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. I move the officer's recommendation is adopted. Could the Vice Chair please second?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman-Cook. Members. Councillor Crittenden.
Thank you. Most of my questions have been answered, but given that these are family-sized units, the flats, is the bin storage, does it meet the minimum requirements to be adequate for the number of family-sized units that you've got there?
Well, we have consulted with Waste and Recycling, and they've raised no concerns with it. They're quite happy that it's easily accessible, and they have looked at the plans, and they have raised no concerns with the waste provision.
I think it was more as to whether or not the size is adequate for the number of people that it needs to, that are going to be producing the rubbish, or is there going to be overflow?
Well, it's quite a large area. What we would look at for units of this number is probably more the larger units with the lift-up lid, rather than individual bins that you get for houses. So in terms of the size of the refuse store there, they would adequately be able to provide a large number of those larger waste bins. So, yeah, we consider it acceptable.
Thank you. Councillor Keane.
Thank you. I think it's overdevelopment. I think it's a poor design for the area, which has a lot of quite classic buildings in it, and I have a number of concerns about it. I wonder how much play space there is for a development that would potentially have a lot of young children around. I don't know if you can give me any measurements on exactly how much communal play space there would be. I wonder how many cycles could be stored, again, for the number of residents that there are potentially in this development. You know, how many cycles storage is available. According to the report, there should be 9 visitor parking bays, and there aren't. You've just said about the bins. Does the assessment that there's going to be enough bin space include recycling facilities? And finally, yet again, we're told there's, not viable for affordable housing, social housing, and yet that is what we desperately need. And I think developers need to come up with plans that actually are viable and can still contribute to our total. Thank you. Can you come back on the questions, please?
Thank you. Emma.
In terms of the cycle storage, the cycle store would provide 34 bikes, so 1 per unit. In terms of the amenity space, the larger community space to the rear of the flats is approximately 21 metres by 8 metres in size. And then for the houses, it's 11.5 by 4.5. So as you know, we don't have a policy that actually sets out a minimum size standard for amenity space. It's just a matter of considering the plan and whether we consider that the size is usable and whether it's overlooked. So obviously this space, through the amended plans, one of the original amended plans, well, the very original, had hardly any amenity space. The second one that we looked at through the first submission had the central section of the larger building projecting right into the middle of the space, so it would have made it quite disconnected. So we've asked for the setback of that central section in order to create quite a wide area of amenity space that's really usable for children within the development, and then that would also be secured with fencing around it in order to make it safe from the parking area.
Waste and recycling, when they look at it, look at housing developments, they have particular standards for both recycling and waste in terms of the bins that are required. And in fact, the council is working on a specific SPD which will enshrine that in planning guidance. But we do apply the requirements that they provide to ensure that there's enough. And they are very keen to tell us when we haven't done that. So we are quite confident in what's been put forward. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hart, did you please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm terribly appalled by this development. I think it's overdevelopment of the site. I don't think any thought has been given to the conservation area or the houses locally. And I must agree with Councillor Keane. I just don't think there's enough amenity space. There's not enough parking. You're expecting all of these people just to have 30 cars, one each, and it just doesn't happen. There's just not enough space. There's not enough parking in that road anyway. And I think that to have a building that's 4 stories high, in an area where most of the windows are 3 stories or 2, there's no comprehension of trying to keep those windows in line at all. There's just trying to get as much into this site as possible. And the fact that there's no social housing is an absolute disgrace. Absolute disgrace. And I must admit, I can't approve this application at all. I'm awfully sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. Councillor Garner.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I listened to Councillor Keane and I agree with everything that she said, and Councillor Hart. And I would like to emphasise the fact that we have on a number of occasions at this committee had applications before us that haven't provided the right amount of affordable housing as stated in the local plan. We've seen a number of very, very long viability statements that try to justify this. But as far as I'm concerned, and I think as far as a lot of us are concerned, if a development can't provide 30% affordable housing, then the development is not viable, and I won't be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. Mr. Lewis.
I just want to come back with regards to the affordable housing policy, SP23, which specifically talks about when a development isn't viable, that affordable housing, if it's been proved that it's not viable, doesn't have to be provided as long as that evidence is there. It was the key issue in the public inquiry about the Shondane Road inquiry, and in that case it was clearly found that the evidence that was produced was acceptable. We are rigorous with our checks about this. Its particular provision is made within the local plan to ensure that development does come forward, a viable development comes forward, and we will always try and maximise the right amount of affordable housing. But there are some developments that will come forward that won't provide affordable housing, only if the evidence is there. In this instance, this is a brownfield site, and what that means is that there is an existing use value that is accrued from it being a garage, and that needs to then be compared with the gross development value of this development when you take away then the costs of building it, which gives you the residual land value. In that instance, the comparison between getting the site to come forward, that money that would take to basically sell the land, then is compared to that residual land value. And that's when a development may be unviable if that residual land value is too low. Now, this does happen on brownfield sites. If development is wanted for housing on brownfield sites rather than in the countryside, we need to look at these sites, which is why it's been allocated. The notional number that was provided, which was put forward as 10 units, has clearly been demonstrated to not be viable. And now, obviously, if members were to look to reduce the size of development, that would obviously impact on the contributions that are being provided. Admittedly, I appreciate that's less than is required by what has been put forward by the requirements of the different consultees. But at the same time, the site, from the evidence that we've got that's been independently assessed, will not come forward for housing development if the number of units is reduced. So that it's a balance, and I do appreciate it's a difficult position for members to be in, and this is arguably a new debate that we're having at committee, because usually we're talking about countryside sites and it's pretty clear cut what the issues would be and that the costs actually are lower. But this is one of those situations where viability is always going to be looked at in a lot of detail, which is what we've done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and Councillor Hart, you wish to come back.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we all understand how it works here, and we're intelligent people here, and we do understand what the developer wants to achieve and what you want to achieve. We don't take it for granted we're always going to have the 30% housing. We all understand that. However, when you look at that picture that Emma put forward of the housing either side there, terraced houses, they're 2.5 stories, almost 3. None of the pictures of that new building actually run in line with any of the other properties at all in any way, shape or form. And that's what we're trying to achieve surely in this sort of area of conservation. Okay, it's on the outskirts, so let's just, I know a house that's 3 feet away from the conservation area. And the rules are very different. But I mean, at the end of the day, what you want to try and achieve is something which goes with the local area. And that has had no thought about that at all, in my opinion. And that's what we're here to discuss, because we're all planning committee. And I don't think, okay, we've got a big block on the left, but I mean, that's on the seafront, let's be honest about it. It's not up the side road per se, is it? And in respect of that, I think if you're going to try and get all of this development in, you've got to try and look as an overall scope, but I don't think that achieves it in any way, shape or form. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. Mr. Livingston, I'm going to bring you back.
I'm not going to dispute in terms of, I'll argue the merits of the case in terms of, obviously the officer report has put forward what our view is in terms of the context to which this development would sit. And you're right in terms of looking at that context, and that is indeed what an inspector would do when looking at development in this area. And obviously we've talked about that they look at it in very granular detail. I mean, we are very mindful of the mix that is there, and there is a mix. And obviously you mentioned the McCarthy Stone development that you can see on the left-hand side there. That's on both sides of the road, and it's a very clear 4-storey. That's in the conservation area, might I add. And there is development that is very much in this area, which that's why we think the scale here is appropriate. But I do understand that design it has an element of subjectivity that's baked into the judgment that members are required to make. So I do accept that.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit surprised. I really think that there is no. I'm kind of getting very fed up with seeing all these characterless developments. When you say if I were designing something that were going to fit into the area, it wouldn't be square boxes. But what I'm worried about is there's no reference to any other than the electric charging points as to what energy efficient things are being put into the actual properties, like kind of how they're going to be heated, what sort of heating they're going to have, what kind of water supply, water tables they're going to have. And I would have thought that now that would be a perfect opportunity to make them eco-friendly as well.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. A little bit of discussion up here, please.
I believe, I don't know the number off the top of my head, there's a condition with regards to water efficiency, which is one of the requirements of the local plan in terms of use of water efficiency. There is, obviously coming forward at a pace, requirements with regards to building regs, which will increase the standards for energy efficiency above what's currently Part L, and will increase it, I think it's by 25% for the future home standards. In terms of energy efficiency, we wouldn't say that any additional measures that might be put on. So, for example, I don't want to cite Councillor Hart, but I know his view is to put solar panels on everything. That's not a policy requirement, so we wouldn't be able to require that to happen in this instance, or that sort of thing.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Wing.
Yeah, I had a recent Save Our Seas Ramsgate meeting with the Southern Water. The CEO actually stated that Thanet is the most stressed area in terms of water in the country. What's their view on this development? Because we are drastically increasing the water usage and the sewerage out of this site. Have they expressed any concerns? And back in Linda, Councillor Wright over there, have we got any water saving methods built into this this development, because it is a considerable increase, I would imagine, from a commercial bit to the size of this building, with a number of people now living on site and using water and creating sewage.
Thank you, Councillor Wing. We're just
I can pick up the capacity point rather than the Southern Water point. I found it. It's condition 22, and that's a requirement. It's a bit of a quirk of the system that actually you're required to have a planning condition, which means that a development has to conform with building regs, which is a rarity, which is to do with the meeting of the required technical water efficiency standards of 110 litres per person per day. Now, I know that the debate, which again we've had this before, this debate about the abilities to flush twice rather than once, but it is again building in those efficiencies as much as we can within the bounds of what we have. I'm going to pass to Emma with regards to the drainage element.
So in terms of the drainage, Southern Water were consulted. They've basically agreed there's a proposal for foul drainage to be connected via a new private foul drainage system, which will connect to a manhole within or foul sewer in Harold Road, and a manhole connection, and also within Norfolk Road as well, a new manhole connection. They've also advised that they can provide the foul sewage disposal to serve the development, and they can provide a water supply to serve the development. So they basically raised no concerns at all. In terms of the actual surface water drainage, I'm not sure if that's kind of what you were asking as well. The proposal at the moment is to provide permeable paving for the parking spaces and soakaways for the roof, and runoff from the roof and runoff from the accesses as well. So KCC Suds initially did ask for more information to demonstrate that this could happen, but given the fact it's an existing site that's currently in use, it's very difficult to carry out those tests up front. So they were satisfied that a condition that would require a detailed drainage system to come in as part of a condition was acceptable.
Thank you, Emma. Councillor Everett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not going to support this application because I have problems with the look of the building, to be honest with you, and I tend to sympathise with the comments that have been made about its appearance in the street scene. And obviously, I find it unacceptable, frankly, that £76,000 is the contribution which can be put forward for social housing in the context of policy and in the context of the crying need for social housing in Thanet. But I would say, where I have some sympathy with what Mr Livingston said, is we can't keep having it both ways. If we don't want to develop the countryside, and I think that most people don't, we can't also say when these sites come forward that we don't want these developed either. If this is in the local plan for housing, we have to recognise that, and we have to maybe make some compromises. To me, this is too big a compromise, and there's a compromise in terms of the way the building looks. But I think we have to be honest with the public, and also I don't think that the existing buildings are of much merit, I have to say. So whilst I don't like what's proposed, I don't particularly like the existing either.
Thank you, Councillor Everett. I can't see any other speakers. Okay, members, I think good debate there. I'm now going to put this motion of the officer's recommendation, which is to defer and delegate to officers for approval to yourselves. Those in favour, please show. Two. Those against. All right, abstentions. That has obviously fallen. So if you could bear with me one moment, please. Yes, Mr Livingston, I presume.
Thank you, Chair. So members have mentioned the concerns about scale of development. In terms of the design, the issue is that the debate hasn't focused on one particular element other than scale. And obviously what we've tried to explain is why we consider it on the officer side of things, how the development would fit in with the scale of development that is in the area. There are other points that have been raised with regards to amenity space. One thing it's important to mention, obviously this is a major development. The council is required to determine major developments such as this. However, obviously we are judged as a criteria on how many major developments are turned around at appeal. And that's why with any major development, when members want to refuse it, I would always suggest that the clear reasons for refusal are crystallised to be able to ensure that we have the best possible case to defend at a planning appeal to represent your views. I would suggest, as the officer recommendation at this point, is that we are going out on a site visit on the 10th of June, and I do think it would be important to see the context of the relationship with the neighbouring properties, as well as the relationship with other buildings around there. And if members, after seeing the site in that basis, still consider that it should be refused, which is the overriding issue, then obviously hopefully a motion can be put forward which includes the detail of why that should be refused in terms of whether or not it's considered to be out of keeping with particular design points in the area. However, it is indeed entirely up to members.
Thank you, Ian. I do understand, and I think Councillor Everett has touched on obviously the design and so on. I don't give an opinion. I know it has been obviously refused it. So I will take and listen to Mr. Livingston. I think I will withdraw this now, and I would like somebody to propose a site visit. I think it makes sense. Excuse me, madam. It's down to this committee. I can't allow. Please, I'd like a proposal for a site visit.
Can I ask a question first, Chair?
Carry on.
Thank you, Chair. A site visit is all well and good when you're going to look at a site which you can comprehend and try and envisage what is going to go there. I think that this is a site which is a commercial site, and it's very difficult to try and envisage a huge block of flats next to a contemporary building, if you so desire. And I don't think a site visit will help any of us, this is my opinion, will help any of us try and gauge that as to what it will look like, because we can see here what it looks like better than we can just looking at the front of a forecourt of a garage, to be fair. And I think that by looking at that as councillors, we look at that and think that's too big. And I don't think by having a site, personally, I don't think by having a site visit it's going to help at all.
I will ask Ian to come back. Okay.
Just to confirm, apologies, I may not have been particularly clear. It is to ensure that the context of the scale has been considered. Obviously, the scale is the only point that's been raised by members in terms of design. Again, members, if a motion is to be put forward to refuse the application, then I think it would be, it would be a suggestion that if that motion was put forward, then there would potentially be an adjournment, so we could work with the member that puts forward the motion to be able to crystallise again that point. But obviously, we would normally suggest that you either go to a site visit or we bring it back the following month so that we can best represent your views at an appeal. But again, if members want to refuse it this evening, that is your option. It will be about putting the motion forward. If a motion is put forward by the chair for a site visit and that falls, a motion can be put forward to refuse it with reasons. But again, we would just want to support members in that refusal to make sure that we're actually able to actually argue it at appeal.
Thank you, Ian. What I will say is, obviously, it's been, Ian has mentioned this to you regarding, this is a site on the local plan for housing. I say I'm not going to give an opinion because I think I don't. I'm just stating what, if this did go for an appeal, we've got to be very, very careful. The amount of those major appeals go, if they do go, for this council. I am aware of that, and I think most of the members here totally understand what's being said, and this is up to the committee what they say. But I'm saying I think we've got to be very, very careful. Too many appeals, we could land ourselves in a little bit of difficulty, if I may say that. I hope I'm not out of order saying that. Yes, I will. I'm going to, Councillor Crittenden, I will allow you to come back.
Yes, I wanted to ask what scope is. I've heard three main areas of concern. The design of the frontage of the building and the play space in particular, and the third one's now gone out of my head. What scope is there to address those concerns, and and then come back? How can we do that?
I understand where you're coming from. I know the applicant is in the room, and I'm not asking him to answer that question at all. But I think I will move on because it is quite a difficult one. Again, I've listened, like we all have, and yourselves, of your feelings, and understand what you're saying. So I feel on this occasion, at this stage, a site visit would be a good thing, but I do have to have a proposer for that. And I can totally understand what Councillor Hart is saying. I do know the site, like quite a few people. On that, I am going to ask for a proposer for a site visit, if anyone is wishing to, will do that. No? Okay, we haven't got a proposer, so I'm going to have to speak to her.
I may, Chair. So it's for a member to put a motion forward, and then to whoever wants to put a motion forward, potentially for refusal, and then outline the reasons. Then a seconder, and then we can try and we'll work with you to ensure that we can capture that.
Councillor Garner.
Yeah, I think I feel, and I think a number of us do, that one of the main reasons we're refusing this is because of the lack of affordable housing and the inadequacy of the affordable housing contribution. And I'd like us to be able to carve a refusal reason around that. Would it be possible? I think we're not quite unanimous, but we're quite a large majority against this on those grounds. Would it be possible to ask you to come back to try and represent our views around that, and come back to the next planning committee meeting with a formulation of words that we can then agree, so as we can formulate that refusal? I mean, we are quite clear we are refusing this application, as I think illustrated by the fact that none of us want a site visit. We are refusing it, and we'd like you, if possible, to come back to put some very nice planning words that would be well supportable at a possible appeal for us to agree to.
Thank you for that, Councillor Garner.
We can write a report that provides, potential reasons for refusal along the lines that have been suggested. The point to do with affordable housing, again, this comes back to the exact reason that's been put forward for the Shottendane Road appeal. We've looked at the evidence, it's been independently looked at about the viability. The policy is very clear, and again, the only reason why we were able to defend costs in the Shottendane Road situation is by getting various additional viability evidence to argue, which in itself obviously had a cost element. In this instance, it's a lot more clear cut because there is an existing use value on the site. And that has been looked at, and there has already been debate. So I think I understand that members clearly would like to refuse the application. I think the key reasons that have been put forward are the design, the lack of play space for the units, and the lack of affordable housing. Those are the three things. So I think to resolve the matter, if the suggestion would be, or proposed by someone, that we bring you a report which goes through those three issues, it will give you our view on those and what you can and can't refuse on in our view, and then members can decide, no, we don't agree with you, we'll refuse it on all of them, no, we'll refuse it on 2 of them, 3 of them, 1 of them.
Thank you, Ian, for that. If Councillor Hart.
I'm happy to prepare that, propose that, Chair, but I also would like to put in the fact that it's out of keeping with the area. And I think
That'll be taken into account with the design.
And
Yeah,
I
we'll
think
make
that
sure that's
is,
covered.
we do understand, all of us understand how you work out affordable housing. That doesn't mean to say that we agree with it, but that's our personal opinion, and that's why you have a planning committee. We understand what you said earlier, that it's not a viable product in this case. We would like it to be, but we also want it done in a way that this really isn't in keeping. And I'm happy to propose what you put forward, Ian, because I think that's the way to go, because that's probably the only way it get refused at appeal, or carry out appeal, if you see what I mean.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hart. So I have a proposer. Could I have a seconder? Couple of hands.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to second. I'm sorry, I think there was an added thing. We did talk about overdevelopment as well. If that can be.
That will be, it's part of the issue with design, so it's intrinsic, yeah.
Okay, so could I have a show of hands, please, that this will be brought back to yourselves with those recommendations? That is unanimous. Thank you, members. I know that's been a little bit confusing and so forth, but thank you. That concludes the business for this evening.
Could I ask for some clarification on the residents speaking? Because on the item concerning births 4, I know that
Wing,
it's about that only one resident was allowed to talk, and yet we've just had 3 residents talk on this last item. Can you clarify why the rules were different?
Councillor Wing, I think you are. They can. That can be clarified, but I believe councillors can book in on the night if you like, if they're 20.1, but it is advisable for members of the public.
It was about residents, only one resident.
No,
there was one allocated place for a resident with births 4, 5.
Mr. Livingston's going to have a
last
chat.
Item.
Mr. Livingston's going to have a chat to you, say how it has to work. Thank you, members, and good night.